I left my gavel on the table, so I can't make a loud noise to get everybody's attention.
Oh, Stephanie has it.
Go for it,
Stephanie.
Stephanie, there you go. All right, we're back. I'm going to hand it over to our educator panel, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I hope everyone's able to enjoy their lunch while they're also listening to our educator panel. I'm Allison Warren, principal of Gates, and this is my colleague Dana Labb, principal of Blanchard. Thank you for your time today. I know it's a very, very long day, but it's also very important that we bring our educators' voice into this discussion. They are working with our students on a daily basis, are the front lines to what is happening every day. When creating this panel, we also wanted to make sure that we created a panel that had that was able to represent each level, but also could speak to some of the roles and questions that have come up today. So hopefully this does help clarify some of those points. They're going to share stories about what they do and how education and being a teacher has changed over time. One of our school committee members just this morning wanted to remind all of us that our teachers have been doing more with less for these past few years. So I think that that's also something just to keep in mind. We are going to very quickly go through and share the roles. Susan Ranjani, if you could just kind of raise your hand. Ranjani is one of our multilingual education teachers in K-6. Sarah Wilcox is a 6th grade classroom teacher. Emily Mullen is an English teacher at the high school. Hannah Rubio is a school adjustment counselor at the high school. Lindsay Entwistle, did I say it correctly? Awesome. Is a special education connections program teacher, special educator. Ash Hayes is a special education teaching assistant in our Compass program at the elementary level. And Stephanie Tajima, 4th grade teacher. Danielle Healy is a K-6 reading specialist. Marin, I do have glasses on. Marin Gulliver is one of our fabulous K-6 literacy coaches. And Susan Root, school psychologist and interim special education coordinator at the high school. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Dana, and he's going to share the format.
Thank you very much. So the format for this portion is going to be 4 prearranged questions. So we'll work through those first, and there'll be some individuals who will speak specifically to a question. They have about 5 minutes, and we'll leave another minute of wiggle room for any last-minute thoughts. The time will be up for them, and they'll manage that on their own. And then at the conclusion of the 4th question, we will open it up to members of the school committee to ask any questions that they want as follow-up to any specific educator that they want. So we're going to start with our first question. In your experience, how have the needs and preferences of students evolved over the years? And what adjustments have you had to make in your teaching methods to accommodate these changes? We're going to start with Ranjini.
Hi everyone, I'll start again. Hello everyone, my name is Ranjini Reddy, and as Allison said, I'm a multilingual educator at the Boardwalk campus. My students are children learning English as an additional language in kindergarten through 6th grade. The needs of our ML students are changing as we are getting different kinds of families coming in. The demographics of our ML families coming to AB are changing. We're seeing a rise in SLIFE students in our classroom. SLIFE students are students who have had limited or interrupted formal education. Typically, these students are 2 to 3 grade levels below for literacy and math skills. Additionally, a lot of our SLIFE students are not literate in their home language. So what all this does is that they need one-to-one or small group instruction from a cross-functional team of members, including ML teachers, classroom teachers and assistants, reading and math specialists in the schools. The growing number of these students put a tremendous strain on the system. We have also other newcomer students, and these students may have had formal education, but have minimal or no English proficiency skills. And we also have a group of ML students who are gaining English proficiency, but still need direct, explicit instruction. Due to this diverse nature of students that we have in front of us, our curriculum needs to be more customized than before. We are continuing to rely and incorporate all elements of universal design learning, and we also need to collaborate now more with other team members to help the students. A number of our students have also had difficult immigration experiences and have experienced trauma, and the students do not always get mental health support because of limited resources, and this impacts student learning in the classroom. In addition, many of our ML families who are coming now are coming with needs in many areas. And the ML educators serve the role of the teacher, the license, the family contact, and resource coordinator. So just to reiterate and summarize, because of the increasing number of ML students and the changing needs of our students and their families, ML students tend to spend more effort and time per student as an educator. Further, the ML teacher has taken on a cross-functional role to best support the students' socio-emotional and academic growth. Thank you.
My name is Emily Mullen, and I am an English teacher at the high school. And I first started teaching at AB in 2006. And when I arrived, I was given a copy of the final exam so that we knew where we were headed. And the first question on the final exam was about the Odyssey, and it was something along the lines of, the Odyssey is A, a novel, B, an epic poem, C, a play, D, nonfiction. And so we were prepping our students for a multiple choice final exam, and we were very much the, I guess, the sage on the stage, kind of talking at our students. And I think since then, in the last 17 years, we've had a shift, a necessary shift to being the guide on the side. And in terms of preferences, I think that we're seeing students need student-centered activities as opposed to lecturing. They need activities and lessons that address their multiple learning profiles or their diverse learning profiles that include multiple modes of instruction. We're working towards variety in assessments. I think when I first started, there was an emphasis on lower order thinking skills, so regurgitation and comprehension and knowledge. And we've made a shift to higher order thinking skills, so we're thinking more about application and evaluation and synthesis. And to do all this, we've shifted our curricular, our tools. So when I first started with the Odyssey, we were reading one, it was the Fitzgerald translation, and it was difficult to digest. And our strategy was to use comprehension questions for students and kind of pull them through the text. Since then, we've reevaluated what students need and what we as teachers need, and we've changed our translation. We've added a graphic novel. We're doing much more interactive exercises. I'm going to talk quickly here. We got another minute, okay. So we also are trying to teach them some translatable skills, so thinking more about the epic hero cycle and how that applies to Disney films or to comic books or to kind of real world lessons and applications. So all of this is to say, I think that we've done a ton as educators to meet the needs of our students in terms of kind of 21st century skills, and it's been a really meaningful and worthwhile ride for us as teachers and for the students.
We're turning the sleep off of the iPad momentarily. Question number 2 is, in terms of students' well-being, mental health, and social-emotional learning, what trends have you observed, and what resources or support systems do you believe are crucial for addressing these aspects in the school setting? Our first educator is going to be Hannah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Rubio. I'm a school adjustment counselor at the high school. So I think everyone in this room is probably pretty aware that the last 20 years has really been a changing landscape in youth mental health. Really, since 2007, we've seen a sharp incline in the rates of depression and anxiety among our adolescents. That has not been anything that we've been immune to at AB. I was looking and prep for this at some current data and research, and I was just struck by a CDC survey that was done in 2021. 37% of adolescents in that survey reported having poor mental health, identified as either anxiety or depression. And the same survey found that 20% of teens had seriously considered suicide that year. So what's that looking like for us at the high school or in the school district in general is a lot of student needs, with our school mental health team really kind of acting in a more reactive way, trying to keep up with the needs of our students. In spending all of our time with students who are having difficult challenges, we are not able then to spend the same amount of time doing more proactive SEL work, specifically at the high school level. One data point that I think kind of we look at as a correlation often is our absenteeism. Our most vulnerable students tend to have the highest rates of chronic absenteeism, with some over 30% of our student population and some of those more vulnerable populations being considered chronically absent. How we can address that or how we can support our students is ensuring that across the district we have manageable caseloads, that we have time built in to work with our students to do more of that proactive SEL work across all levels, and to really be working closely with families and students around attendance, whether that be through an attendance counselor or other built-in supports, because we really can't support our students if we don't have them in front of us. But what we're seeing is the students that really need us the most aren't always making it to school.
Lindsay, you're next.
So I'm Lindsay Entwistle. I'm a special educator at the elementary level, and some of the trends that we see at the elementary level, not just in special education, but it's now a lot in general education, is the explicit and direct instruction that students require in coping skills. A huge resource that we use, at least at Conan and all throughout the elementary schools, is relying on our team of specialists and teachers within the building. We have a really great team that responds to calls when students are dysregulated or need support for emotional needs at the time. Our team's made up of the special educator, our administration, our school psychologist, our occupational therapist for her lens through the sensory needs, our BCBA for behavioral needs, and we all work together to address the needs of the students and really look at the whole child. In our program, one resource that we started to use is co-taught groups with our school psychologist, special educator, occupational therapist, and again, to look at all the different needs of the child to really take in the whole child.
Thank you, Lindsay. And Ash.
Hello, I'm Ash. I work directly with the students day to day. I've noticed that not just in the special ed program, but also in general education, as pretty much everyone has said, there's been an increase in mental health needs and performance anxiety, student absences, and thank you. An increase in students struggling to navigate social emotional situations. The biggest resource that we can offer our kids that I've seen the most change in is people, and trained people who can work with students directly and teach them in the moment when they need it. The staff that we have with our students act as a bridge between a kid that might feel super isolated and different or feel like they're struggling alone to being able to access the curriculum. For example, I had a student who could only tolerate being in the classroom for about 10 minutes at a time, and he was really having a hard time accessing curriculum even when he was in the classroom. He didn't participate in discussions, he wasn't making friends, but having that staff with him, the trained staff who was empathetic, who could think on their feet quickly, was able to bridge that gap. And now this year he's spending the majority of the time in the classroom. He's participating, he's made friends, he's doing excellent. And I've seen that time and time again with each student that comes through our program. So definitely it's a small thing, but a big, powerful impact of having trained people with our kids.
Great job on time. Okay, question 3. With the changing demographics of students, what specific challenges and opportunities do you see arising in the classroom, and how do you believe these changes should be addressed in the school budget? We're going to start with Stephanie and then Danielle.
I'm Stephanie Tajima, and I've had the pleasure of working at Douglas and at Blanchard. As you all know, we look at the changing community demographics every year. We also see changes in expected family structures, as well as diverse student life experiences outside of school. Children bring all of this to the classroom with them every day. And our first priority, as Trish alluded to, as did Jim, that our first priority is to nurture an environment where students feel comfortable, accepted, and safe. As educators, we are ever mindful of the latest research in scientific educational science, and we adjust the lens with which we look at our students. Through our current lens, we identify and work to support an enormous population of unique needs. To support all students, elementary classroom teachers perform many roles, even with support from our specialists and our coaches. We implement the multi-tiered system of supports, or MTSS, and we differentiate in every moment of our day. A typical classroom like mine can see 4 levels of multilingual learners, as Ranjini mentioned. We have many unique students receiving special education services, and they maybe need focus on OT, PT, speech and language, math support, reading support, specific health needs. And then we teach multiple layers to our general education students, managing data and adjusting groups of students continually. All of these students are part of our typical classrooms. Research shows that the highest predictor of student success, the deciding factor, is whether we can engage our students in our teaching, how the teacher finds that just right way to engage with each student to make them feel seen and heard and valued. That's what their success, that's how we get success for them. And we build growth mindset, perseverance. We work first and foremost to teach those social emotional skills so that they can access academics. We work through many programs, and we need to personally be prepared to help them feel those supports through programs like Responsive Classroom, SEED, and LIFTS. And all of those programs are part of our budget, and all of the students and staff would definitely suffer from losing those programs. The diversity within our demographics presents incredible opportunity to teach students about unique needs and how to understand the breadth of diversity in the world around us. However, we already struggle to meet the needs without enough support, and we receive more mandates from the Department of Education. We need to support to appropriately work with the students in our classroom, and like many have said, losing dedicated staff and increasing class size would be an immediate threat to our ability to meet the needs of all our learners.
Hi, I'm Danielle Healy. I'm the reading specialist at Merriam, and hopefully you've heard from these teachers that they are more skilled and more skilled every day in identifying the ever-changing needs of our students and are constantly making decisions on how they can meet those needs. Lots of thought and planning goes into universally designed instruction. It creates engagement and high standards for all learners. But sometimes, honestly, these plans don't come to fruition because of a sudden social emotional change or just simply being understaffed. 5 to 10 years ago, I was a classroom teacher as well, and that type of pivot happens sometimes, but now it seems to be a daily occurrence. Through our tiered system of support process, the team collects data to identify learning targets for grade level or class. We create groups for children that require Tier 2 support to reach those targets. And we identify students that must be taught prerequisite skills and intensive intervention to even have a chance of reaching those targets. In order to work within this tiered framework, all classroom environments will need to be managed in such a way that all students can work independently and effectively, and that there's enough staff to run those targeted groups. All of this work absolutely requires a team. Coaches to work with the teachers to develop targeted lessons, not only for their whole class, but for small groups. Specialists and assistants to work with the neediest students to build the prerequisite skills.
counselors, psychologists to support our kiddos in crisis, but also to build that social emotional toolbox. Our ML teachers, of course, who are receiving more and more newcomers every day, who are not just language and cultural support, but have to become our reading and writing and math interventionists as well, especially those with interrupted schooling. As far as opportunities, our educators, administrators, support staff have the knowledge and the understanding. They understand the evidence, the research, the science of how kids learn best. Now we need the structures and resources in place to make an impact on student learning and engagement. We're always thinking about how we can do what's best for kids. That's what we think of every day when we're in our meetings. We have the training and the high quality curriculum, and now it's just a matter of putting the consistent structures and resources in place. At Miriam, we are currently short a coach and a reading assistant. So I'm currently living what the budget is proposing now. And I'm constantly making decisions every day of which group of teachers, which group of students are going to get the support and which ones might not.
16 seconds left. It's like we actually practiced almost. Perfect.
Dana, we did practice.
Oh, yeah.
All right, our last prepared question. How has technology impacted the way you teach, and in what ways do you think it has changed the learning experience for students? Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Wilcox. I've been teaching 6th grade in Acton for 19 years. So my second year is when smartboards started to be integrated into classrooms. I've seen the invention of YouTube in my time teaching, and iPads and Chromebooks. So I've seen the changes that have happened over the last 2 decades. And the bottom line is that technology is ever changing. We don't know what technology is going to exist when the students in front of us are faced with careers in their future. We don't know what the world will look like with technology for them. So we're preparing them without knowing what that future will look like. And the best way to do that is to make them comfortable with the technology we have now to build on those skills for what they'll face in the future. This requires teachers to constantly stay on top of technology. We have to constantly be building our knowledge base to be able to effectively use it in the classroom. Some of this has come through professional development within the district with teachers training other teachers and our technology leaders training us and coaching us and us working together with collaboration. Personally, I found creative ways in my career at AB to gain outside PD experience by presenting at MassQ 3 different years, which allowed me free entry into that PD experience for those years. So teachers are finding creative ways to extend beyond what we can get within the district. And then making sure that we are able to co-teach with each other and collaborate. I might come up with a wonderful idea in my mind to work with students, but I need to then collaborate with special educators, our multilingual learner educators, to ensure that there might be something I'm missing that they can then add to with their lens and make the opportunity for all students with that technology even better. When we're working with students with technology, it's less about that particular tool and more about the skills that they are going to gain through that experience. So it's the value of revision, learning to effectively collaborate with others on a shared document or Google Slides, learning how to judge media, what is a reliable source and what is a less reliable source, or where is their bias within a source of information. And trying to stay on task, because if we're using YouTube, which has fantastic resources, it also has a lot of resources that could suck us down a rabbit hole and we're all of a sudden very off task. And that's something that any of us who have worked remotely or on anything at home, we know is a lure, and we're teaching our students from a very young age of what it means to stay on task with their progress. And then how to use tools appropriately, and the latest is AI. Now there's the lure of AI in teaching students how to avoid that, and then how AI can be also used effectively within the future of technology. This also requires us to make sure that our technology stays up to date. So it's there's multiple layers here. I've seen Java Go, I've seen Flash Go, and that means that a lesson that we create one year, we might have to completely recreate the next year as educators, which takes time to vet resources. You have to watch a YouTube video completely all the way through before you put it in front of a student. All of that takes a lot of time. It takes opportunity to collaborate. So as a 6th grade teacher, I'm not recreating the wheel that all the other 6th grade teachers in other schools have already done. So there's that need to meet across grade levels. There's that need to be able to share out. It also means access to materials. I've seen fabulous websites like Newsella now be mostly paid per subscription. And currently, I regularly use Britannica School, which the district pays for. It levels from elementary all the way to high school. It allows the articles to be put into multiple languages. It allows students to listen to the articles. There's visuals as well. It allows them to properly cite. If I didn't have that resource funded, I would be very limited with the reliable resources I could provide students. BrainPop is another one that we use regularly that has videos, but also additional attached resources and interactive features. And then there's other sites that teachers can request access to that, again, allow different tools for students to use and different ways for them to showcase their learning. On top of that, it's our Chromebooks, ensuring that they're working properly, that when they go down, we have a replacement available and someone who can troubleshoot with us. And same with our projectors. I'm currently working with a smartboard that on some days overheats, and it might be 30 minutes till it turns back on. So we're quickly pivoting to make instruction continue. I want to end with a couple words from 6th grade students who I've surveyed at the end of every school year about their experience with different opportunity with technology. So these are words from some of my students from last year regarding choice and how they learn about content, and then also how they showcase their content. And these are 3 different students. I liked having choice, as it made me feel like there were multiple ways to express my thoughts. I like it because it's a gate to creativity, not just everyone doing the exact same thing. And I liked being able to make my own decision in how I was showing my work instead of a teacher telling me I had to do it in a certain way. And so if we want to create creative students out there for a world we don't even know what it looks like, we need to give them those opportunities in as many ways as possible.
Thank you. We are now going to open it up to the school committee. So we do not need to go through Adam at this point. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask, either any of the 4 questions we can go back to or a question of your own, feel free to do that. We'll start with Ginny. You can ask any member.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say thank you to every single one of you for being here and for all the work that you do every single day. You know, sometimes it's hard to connect what we do with what you guys do. You know, we don't have a lot of opportunities to communicate with one another. So I just want to let you know that, you know, there's a huge amount of gratitude from where I sit to what you guys are doing every single day. And I say that as a school committee member and a parent in this community. And I just want to say thank you very much to Stephanie and for all of you who have headed off a question that I was going to ask, which was, why do we care what student preferences are? And I think that, you know, you answered that beautifully in that, you know, when we focus on achievement, which a lot of people in this community are very, very focused on achievement, however that's measured and whatever you think about those measurements, that it, you know, the engagement is really the key. And if you're not able to engage students, it really hobbles their ability to access and learn. So, you know, I know it takes an incredible amount of professionalism, dedication, and creativity that you bring to the table every single day. So thanks for making that very clear. And you know, I appreciate you guys being here on a Saturday. Thanks.
Everything Jenny said. And so excited to hear so many of you using the language of universal design for learning. And I'm wondering if you could define a little bit for the broader audience what that is and what you need from us to be effective at it.
Yeah. I can speak to that. Hang on. I put it down in simpler terms earlier today, there's really 3 components to universal design for learning. The simplest terms means providing multiple ways to increase student engagement and motivation by providing choice and providing ways for students to personally connect to content, so being able to see themselves or see how what they're learning connects to their lives. It also involves a variety of options for how students can access content, so that could mean a choice between a video, reading a text, listening to a text being read aloud, and also maybe something interactive or hands-on, and then also choice in how they can demonstrate their understanding. So that might be making a 3D model, making a digital model. This year, with students writing about science claims, I've been giving them the choice where you could write about it, but you can also illustrate. And the level of detail some students have put into creating just with features in Google Slides, so shapes and arrows and labels, demos of the science concept they're talking about. Some of them look like they could be in science textbooks. So it's them really being able to deeply and creatively show their understanding in a way that works individually for them. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for, sorry, you go ahead.
Do you mind? Okay, sorry. I just want to take the opportunity to add on to when we talk about tiered instruction and thinking about supporting all learners. So when we talk about universally designed instruction, we're thinking about ways that all students have an access point and an entry point for their instruction. I'm going to speak as a literacy coach because I'm exceptionally passionate about making sure that all AB students have an opportunity to learn how to read. As Danielle shared, we know how to teach children how to read. We've had the brains research for a long time. That's a podcast for another time. We know how to teach kids how to read, and we really have the brain research on how we learn as children and as adults. Part of my role is supporting adult learning as well. We need the access to support, resources, time, and that key collaboration. I work in just 2 schools, but I collaborate all across the district. And our most valuable assets for the ways to support students is each other. I grew up here. I live here now with my 2 little children that are not in school yet. And it is so paramount to note that our greatest asset is our people and how our people work to support our students. That level of professionalism is huge, and that does require the instructional leadership. That requires consistent support from administrators, coaches, specialists, teachers that are working so hard each and every day. And I feel fortunate to see that. That work doesn't happen without invisible roles and positions. Curriculum coordinators, specialists that are behind the scenes like instructional support coaches, and also technology support. All of these roles are oftentimes invisible to the public, but what they do behind the scenes plays a huge role in the experience for our kids. And I think when we think about what all students get in Tier 1, it's important to think about what we do to make that happen. And many, many things are happening behind the scenes.
Thanks. Thank you all for doing this. I really appreciate having you and changing the face and finally getting Adam's yoke off our neck so we could just talk. Ginny, you say the best stuff. Over the past few years, new social and emotional tools have been identified. New social and emotional needs have been identified and mainstreamed. And I'm curious as to how the opportunities for social, emotional, accommodations have adjusted the way that you have to act as teachers. How has it changed the role of the teacher when you see that's more than just standardized tests and textbooks?
I can speak to this. I think in a concrete way, what we've done is adjust our practice and our routines. So I open my class with a mindful minute and a check-in question every day, and I think that helps. Regardless of the student's needs, it helps ground them in the moment. It helps them be present in where they are in the English class. It gives me a chance to have a low-stakes question to get to know them as individuals and to figure out kind of where they are on any given day. I think in a more deliberate and professional way, we are, as Marion was saying, we're communicating behind the scenes. So I think what's especially important is to have the time to talk to students, other teachers. So if I have a student in my class who seems to be struggling socially and emotionally, I'm going to reach out to their other classroom teachers, I'm going to reach out to their counselors, I'm going to reach out to their school psychologists, I'm going to reach out to their special educators. And so I think what's especially important is that we as teachers have an opportunity for that type of communication to support students not only academically, but with the social emotional learning. So to that end, I think this idea of people matter, that the faculty matters, these conversations and communication matter. So I think in terms of going back to just kind of what we need as teachers or what we want as teachers in terms of prioritizing social and emotional learning, we need to be able to collaborate and to work with each other both in the classroom. I'm in a co-teaching model for one of my classes. I've got a special education assistant in another class. So having the in the class support, but also being able to have the conversations outside of class as well.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on that from an elementary standpoint as well. It's also looking at how we set up our classrooms and helping students to recognize how to advocate for their own needs. So in my classroom, one of the reasons space is so essential is there's alternate seating, there's wobble chairs, there's a standing desk, there's breakout space, because some students find they can't regulate right next to another peer. They need to be able to work in a quieter space, or they need to be able to stand to focus, or they need to come up and ask for a fidget tool. So part of it is helping them recognize what they need, and that goes back to you, DL. How do you learn best? How do you focus best? What do you do when you feel dysregulated? What are your options that are reasonable within the school setting? And I just want to advocate for why that class size matters so much, because the more students you pack into a classroom, the less space you have to allow them to spread out. And that's something that often many of them need to be their best self too.
So, okay, is it clear? How much time, thanks for everything you do. This is a space that I always was interested in when I joined school committee. So how much time do the kids spend in the digital instruction on a daily basis? I know it varies by the grade, but let's say K through 2.
Can you ask
I think
the mic a little
was told
closer?
I don't hold it well. Okay. How much time do kids spend in digital instruction on a daily basis, especially K through 2?
Feel free to jump in, anyone. Kate, I think it really completely depends on the subjects being taught and on the teachers, because we don't have like a digital instruction class like they do at the junior high. So a lot of it's integrated into curriculum. Our library media educator is working on integrating technology in, so they have that class about once a week. But a lot of it is integrated into instruction of content. So it's not that we're just learning this tool. We might be learning a tool while also learning something about science or something ELA related. So it's really integrated. It's not a separate block of time.
So when you say it's integrated, would you not know how much time of your instruction you're using digital tools?
I think one clarifying point would be that, especially in the lower grades, where I'm a former first grade and third grade teacher, we're very mindful of the access to technology. And as Sarah said, the technology, it's not digital instruction, it's using technology as a tool to support the content knowledge. From my experience of what I currently see in kindergarten and first grade in the 2 schools that I'm in, is that there's very limited time where students are using technology directly. It's used as a tool to support instruction. It might be used as an intervention tool as well. That's part of what we do to support students as well. But in terms of iPads or technology doing the teaching, that's not in practice. Did you want to add on to that?
I could just briefly add that I have a fleet of Chromebooks for my students in my 4th grade classroom, and a lot of it is based on those UDL principles of children can choose what is the best access point for them into a learning, whether it be typing or writing. And if they have the choice of reading off paper or reading off a screen or having it read to them, or a video that might be appropriate versus a different entrance point into a concept in science, for example. There's different ways we use it, and various students may choose to use it more or less based on their academic need.
Okay, so the follow-up question for that was the assessment. When you do the digital assessments, right, at the end of the year, beginning of the year, or a quarterly basis, I don't know how often you do, but do they help you in recognizing a kid needs intervention? I know IEPs are set up ahead of time. Those are screened in the beginning of the year, but there are kids who kind of are in the gray area, who can be kind of early recognition of their issues. Do these digital tools help? Or is the teacher trying to identify these? I'm sorry, my throat is.
Sure, I can try my best to answer that from an elementary lens. So, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding what the heart of your question is. 3 times a year, we use the iReady assessment tool. That is where students are working either on the Chromebook, I think only on the Chromebook, so that's 2 through 6 in elementary school. We also use other assessments that are not digital. We always take into account as teams, we talked a lot about the teamwork approach here to get multiple perspectives. When we meet in educator teams, we look at that data, the iReady data, but we also look at other aspects of data. As Tricia mentioned, like a big part of my job is collecting data, and that is not on, the teacher has an iPad, but students are reading a paper for something called the DIBBLS, which is a universal screener for literacy. So we take the iReady assessments, we look at that information, and that helps us to think about students that are flagged. So we look deeper at those students. Sometimes we do additional assessments, sometimes other assessments that we do during our benchmarks is also included. And then we have thoughtful discussions, and we ask teachers to say, what are you seeing in the classroom? What does this look like from a day-to-day basis? And then we think about what the students' next steps are and needs are.
Adam, do we now move to the next level?
I think we're going to wrap it up, because what I didn't include in my schedule was the amount of time it will take for these wonderful educators to leave and all of the wonderful administrators and myself to find a seat again.
So today is not just about the numbers, it's also all the people behind the numbers and those invisible positions Maren talked about. Can we give a hand to our educators and thank them for everything they do every single day? Thank you all for being here.
All right, so we're going to take about 5 minutes to do some switching of seats, and then we will come back with the most anticipated topic, I think, of the afternoon, which is potential structural changes for large-scale cost reductions. A marketing guy wrote that. All right, I'm seeing just 1 or 2 missing school committee members. But Peter, why don't we get started? So the last bit of the day here is to talk about some of the potential structural changes, which is obviously something that's responsive to not only the school committee, but both towns want to know, how do we make sure that we don't see this again in the future come up so quickly as a surprise? And we've been talking a lot about a couple of these options. I think the point here is to put them out on the table and to begin to discuss as a school committee and also as a broader community about how we might go about considering some of these and what benefits they may or may not have to our future ability to maintain within the means of the communities. So with that, I will hand it over to Peter.
All right, thanks, Adam. So this, I'm not going to do a ton of presenting here, but I'll probably, for different opportunities, put up a couple of slides to get the discussion going. This is more meant as a discussion for you than it is about a presentation from me. Just thinking back to the slide where I overlaid the school budget and inflation, That's not within our control as a school district. And so can we do things that guarantee we will never be in a position like this again? And the answer is absolutely not. Because if we go through another period of historic inflation, whether it is, like in the 1980s and early 80s, or whether it's like the last 2 years that we've gone through, we're going to have a problem because school budgets are capped relative to the resources of the community. So, I just want to preface this by saying we're going to focus on things that we can control, but there are also going to be things that we can't control that we're going to have to respond to over time. I want to talk about a number of things that all go in the category of looking at structures within the budget. One is around the use of reserves. I want to talk about health insurance, transportation savings, and then I want to talk about some other strategies where this is beyond the role of a school superintendent or a leadership team to determine, because it's more about the overall broad community vision of education. And it really sits with the school committee to weigh these decisions with the community. School start times and elementary transportation, open enrollment, which is our in-district elementary choice platform that we have, and then finally the opportunity, if the school committee wanted to close a school, and what would that look like. So those are the 6 pieces that we're going to talk about over the next period of time here. I'll just jump right into reserve usage. And again, this sits with the school committee, the responsibility for this, but here's my assessment of what I think we need to do. We have used substantial reserves, both in terms of excess and deficiency and circuit breaker in the last several years to offset operation costs. Our reserve levels now are projected to be dangerously low at the end of this coming year, and so we do not have those budgeted at the current time in the FY25 budget, which is causing the assessment increases to both communities to go over the actual school budget by about 3%, give or take a little bit, depending on how the actual formula plays out. But, we have an 8.5% budget increase, but you can see, the next 3%, which is roughly up to what the Acton increase, that 11.4, I think, that is the difference in the elimination of reserves. And then you have the additional 3% that goes to Boxborough, or 4%, which is all enrollment-based. So that's where we're running into an additional challenge this year, is that elimination of the reserves. What I think we need to do long-term is, once we have the use of reserves out of the school budget, I think we need to continue to not use the reserves until a point where we reach that 4% threshold, unless we have an unforeseen emergency, which, can always happen. And then, as we go forward, I really think we need to, limit that to the use for capital purchases. So it becomes something that if you have the reserves over 4%, and you know that you're going to return something at the end of the year, you can take off some of your larger capital items. Because once the capital project is done, it can go away. I don't think this means we don't continue to need to budget for capital in the operating budget. We put aside about $1.5 million on an annual base in the capital budget. About half of it right now is paying that debt, which is at a 1% interest rate. So that was a great, combination of skill and luck that we ran into that. And we also have about half of that, $1.5 million, for annual capital projects. We shouldn't really be playing with that. That's an important element to keep. But then in addition, once we hit the 4% use of E&D, we can then think about capital projects that we want to accomplish at the district level. I think that's a good, reasonable use of excess and deficiency. In terms of circuit breaker, next year we've reduced the use of circuit breaker by about $500,000. As we heard earlier, we should have more circuit breaker coming in next year than we've traditionally had because costs are higher. We should build that back up till we get to, 1 full year of circuit breaker in reserve, and then we just fall into the pattern that, quite honestly, we've been in a long time, which is you hold circuit breaker 1 year in reserve, and then you use what you took in the previous year. And that was always our process, but then we incurred additional special ed costs that, were mandated and outside of our control, and so that obviously led us to a different plan for this year. Those are actually structural changes because they're changes in how we make decisions around the use of reserves that can help us avoid this situation in the future. So that I just wanted to put out there. I want to talk a little bit about health insurance. I'll go through maybe the first 3 or something, and then we can pause, Adam, if you want, for discussion, or I can go through all of it. It's up to you.
Let's see how we feel.
Okay. We're going to wing it. Yeah. All right. So You know, health insurance is obviously a problem. I'm not going to start from the beginning on health insurance because we all know where we're at. You know, we have been working continuously with all of our employee unions and representative from our retirees to really rethink health insurance. We have gotten to a point, and we've talked about this, where the consensus among our groups is that we should not continue with the Acton Health Insurance Trust. We've reached that point. That is a school committee decision. We have the attorney that we brought on board at your last meeting coming on Thursday night to actually talk with you about what the process needs to be to dissolve the trust, what you need to be thinking about as next steps, and what has to come after that. Right now, we've identified that I think we would prefer moving toward the GIC as our insurance option. There's really significant savings in that. We have met a couple of times with the GIC representative. We've been talking with our unions and retiree rep about that. That is the consensus we have, and that's the path that we're actively pursuing. At this point, it will mean changes. You know, we've explored both Maya and GIC. Right now, we offer both Blue Cross plans and Harvard Pilgrim plans. Maya only offers Blue Cross, and GIC only offers actually three different providers plans, but not Blue Cross. So there's no way to reconcile that. However, we do believe that GIC offers significant savings. Gallagher is the consultant to HIT. They were projecting about $3.5 million in annual savings, which is a 17.8% savings over our FY25 rate. We also know that that savings isn't just for the district budget. It's actually for employees as well on their health insurance premiums. So the district share of that savings they predicted would be about $2.6 million a year. The employees would save about $900,000 a year on health insurance costs. I'm going to get a little more granular with that. We wanted to really bat this around as we're working through this process. So we had Gallagher project, and then we took the GIC rates, and we ran them through our own budget projections, both in, a method similar to what Gallagher came up with, but actually looking at each employee and the plan that they currently have, and based on Gallagher's information going forward, projecting what plan they might have. But then what we did is we also did a more conservative estimate, and we took all of the current plans and rolled them into whatever GIC's most expensive plan was, just to make sure that we're making a good financial decision and we're not short-sighted. The reality of it all is probably somewhere in the middle. And I'm not going to go into the details of all the different plans. That's not the reason. I do think it probably is closer to that district projection number than the conservative projection number, because some of the less expensive plans are actually better, more flexible plans, even though they're less expensive. So for example, and I'll just give this one, Unicare, everyone knows the Harvard Pilgrim name. That's about $2,400 a month, $25,000 a year, roughly. Unicare is a little over $2,000 a month. However, Harvard Pilgrim is an HMO type plan where you have to still get referrals. The Unicare plan is a PPO type plan, and so you no longer need to get referrals for physical therapy, specialists. The only thing you have to do is call Unicare and tell them you're about to go to physical therapy, and then the next day show up at your physical therapist and start. So there's a lot more flexibility with even the less expensive plan, and I think we're going to have to do a lot of education with staff and employees in order to realize that. But that's one of the reasons why I think we might be better off, and kind of with our middle district projection, or maybe even slightly, less than that. When we estimated these rates, GIC has not yet published FY25 rates, so there's still some estimation going on here. Gallagher originally had projected a 5.1 average across all the GIC plans for an increase. We went back to them and asked for 9.7. They came back, gave us 9.1. We said, no, really, it's 9.7. And so that's what we've stuck with in our estimations as well. We feel like that's a good, solid, conservative estimate to base savings on. This will require negotiations with all of our unions over the transition to that. We're going to be talking about that more Thursday night with school committee, but we're well into process of, trying to get this resolved. I will say, you know, right now, we were not able, based on the timeline from what came out of HIT, we were not able to make the December 1st deadline we would have needed to have to commit to GIC, because there's a fairly extensive process you have to go through before you can get into GIC that takes at least 30 days. We've missed that December 1st deadline, so right now, based on GIC's statutory requirements, we would have to be able to notify them by July 1st to be able to go in next January 1st, so January 1st of 25. I have been in touch with all of our legislative delegation. I've also been working with a neighboring school district who is in a very similar situation, and there is supposedly some pursuit of special legislation allowing school districts who lose their health insurance to potentially go into GIC for this July 1st. We have to consider that. We have to consider that we also just moved our retirees onto Aetna plans that extend through next January 1st. So there's some complications, but the bottom line to that is I'm not sure right now I would budget for the GIC-like savings for FY25 until we know more. I think what we need to do is continue to budget what we have as if we were fully invested in HIT. And then as we progress through this process, if we realize there's some savings, we can think about it then, but there's a lot to be considered, not only in terms of, potentially, needing to wait to mid-year, but we're gonna have run-out period on claims. And there's the complication that we have the loan that the district and town made to the health insurance trust, but we need to see a real cash flow projection out of HIT in order to figure out what the payout period would be, what liability there is to closing the trust. It's just a really complicated process, and I want to approach it from a conservative lens in terms of the budget. So we're progressing. That's, there is some light at the end of that tunnel, no pun intended. I thought that would, geez. I thought, I got a good rouse on the brakes from the last one when we were talking about buses. I thought light at the end of the tunnel, but evidently not. Sorry. See, now you got it. We're working on it. Health insurance is a work in progress, and it's going to continue to be that way. Transportation savings. In the last school committee meeting, we had thought that if we leased, 4 fewer buses next year, that could result in some fairly substantial savings. We got that bid back from the transportation vendor. Leasing 4 fewer buses only saves us $25,000 because buses cost so much more. I don't know if any of you followed the Hudson news recently. They just went out and rebid their bus lease, their bus contract, because they use a private vendor for transportation. It was a 48% increase over their prior contract. I showed you the inflation slide. I don't have anything else to say, but that is a painful thing. But we will save $25,000, and that will come in on a next version of the budget. So that's something. The next area goes into kind of the bigger structural changes. So I don't know if you want me to pause or keep going.
Yeah. So let me just look at the committee real quick. Are there any sort of specific questions you want to ask about reserve usage, health insurance, and this part of transportation before we look at some of the other things and sort of deliberate the larger piece? So, Andrew, go ahead.
Just a quick question with regard to the E&D shift. Is that going to impact future budgets if we're specifically setting aside reserve? Is that going to cause us to need to go back and ask for more funds?
Say that one more time. I want to make sure I understand it.
Adjusting the use of E&D so that we're not using it as a regular basis. Just curious as to how that can impact future budgets, knowing we are specifically pulling money in to put into reserve.
Once you eliminate the use of E&D and have to make up that gap, once it's out of the budget, it's not going to be a hindrance to the development of future budgets, which is why, it's a really painful process right now to have to go through that, but it's also a reason why it's a structural fix, because it doesn't keep recurring. As long as we have, quite honestly, the wherewithal and the restraint not to tap into it.
I'll look real quick at the boards and committees. Any questions you want to ask specific to these first few things? No. Okay, so let's continue on then, Peter.
Well, that was easy. All right.
So far.
So structural changes. I don't have answers to this. I'm going to present you with some information. These are all ideas that take some significant discussion and deliberation to decide to pursue something. And they're complex, and each issue is more complex than I could get to on a budget Saturday. We would need, a significant lead time to plan a lot of these things. So in 2018, the district changed its start times for high school students and junior high students to a later start time. That was done after considerable study around the health benefits to adolescents, around having a later start time. It was also done after, quite honestly, a lot of participation in national research on sleep trends of our students versus sleep trends of other high-performing school districts across the country. What we learned out of that study was our students were actually reporting higher levels of stress and less sleep than just about every high-performing district in the country. Like, that was the level of stress that our kids were going through. And so there was a lot of work by previous school committees and administration to really think about the impact of stress and sleep and how kids access school. It's not just because we were addressing stress and sleep, but we know from all of the research about brain-based learning that with that level of stress, you actually can't learn and you can't access education, so students don't perform their best. So there were a lot of good reasons why the school committee chose to do that. It also had a cost. And so prior to 2018, the district operated 32 bus routes, which is still very high, but the district operated 32 bus routes. In order to make that change, the school committee also looked at kind of what was a perennial problem for the district and did a lot of family surveys to understand the needs of families in the district. But we had two different tiers of elementary start times, where there was, like the high school and junior high started the earliest, and then there was one tier of elementary that started next, and then a second tier of elementary that came after that. And every year the elementary schools would flip back and forth. That was really hard for families. It also was hard for all of the different activities that happen in the community after school hours because kids had to come and go to activities, and it led to a lot of complexity for people. So the school committee wanted to kind of solve two problems in one opportunity for a solution. Realizing that the district was reimbursed for regional transportation provided the opportunity to be able to do that. And what it meant was, in terms of regional transportation, because of regionalization, we can't charge families to ride buses, but we do get reimbursed from the state. And so we get reimbursed typically 80% to 90% of eligible costs. The state being the state, they find ways not to make things eligible. So the reality is when you look at the budget and the reimbursement versus expenses, it's somewhere between 60% and 70% of costs for transportation come back to the district the year after we've expended them. So it's a revenue source and it's an expense. We added 10 bus routes to the budget when we made this change to single tier transportation, and I remember the change well because it was my first year, so someone else decided it, and then I got to take over the implementation, and it was really fun. I spent my entire first fall driving around to bus stops, evaluating whether they were actually safe for families because we no longer stopped at everyone's door as a district, so that was a change. But we added these 10 routes to the budget. Over that period of time, since we've done that, we've actually been able to bring 5 routes off of that, so we're now currently operating 42 routes. 37 routes, sorry, I was reading the wrong line. We're actually operating 37 routes, so we're down 5 from what we projected. It's probably a combination of slightly less enrollment and our bus transportation system understanding how to make the routes more efficient. So right now, we're probably operating 5 additional buses. Our fully loaded cost for a bus is about $150,000 per bus, which includes the lease and the driver and associated fuel costs and things like that. So you can do the rough order of magnitude for if we found a way to reduce the number of bus routes we were running. In terms of the actual impact on things, what you can see here, the bottom part in gray are the old transportation times. Our high school kids were standing out at the bus stop starting at 6:30 in the morning, which for high school students, if you don't have a high school student yet, congratulations. And it's coming. But 6:30 is early for high school kids to be out at bus stops. They're not awake, they're not engaging in class when they get there. And so, there's a lot of compromise in everything, but the answer was to go about a half hour later for the high school and junior high. You can see what that does to, start and stop times, and then you can see those two elementary tiers, but we had, the 7:05 start time for the junior high and high school. The 8:05 was one of the elementaries, and 8:50 was the second one. And then you can see how that plays out over time. We now have a consistent time for the high school and junior high, and we're able to get all the elementaries on a single schedule. Just some thoughts about that. So I already said, the first couple of bullets about the amount of time and effort that went into the study of that, as well as family surveys, community engagement, everything else. I talked about reimbursement. I talked about fully loaded costs. If you reduce, say, 5 routes or 6 routes off of the current route total, you're going to save the total amount in year 1, but you need to plan for that in year 2, because now the revenue coming into the district is less by, 60% of what you reduced, or 40% of what you reduced. So just something to consider. Changes to elementary time tiers would have a significant impact on families in terms of how they prepare students for school, so there certainly needs to be education and outreach and dialogue around something like that. We also need to work with community providers, because they have now realigned all of the afternoon activities around the school schedules. So there's a consideration of that. It doesn't mean that stops a decision. It just means it needs to be thought about and managed. And then finally, this idea of what is the impact on we've now heard from the educators around the professional learning that's been taking place, but we have aligned schedules across the elementary schools where we can actually do some district-wide professional learning on Wednesdays after school. If we go to 2 tiers, that ends, and you can no longer have those opportunities. So there's certainly savings in it, and we have to be cognizant of what those trade-offs might be as well. I'm not saying it's a reason to either pursue it or not pursue it, but want to make sure that we have a reasonably complex understanding of it before we make quick decisions. I'm going to keep going? Okay. Open enrollment. Now we're getting even more complicated. So the open enrollment policy, and this is a policy of the school district, so it's a school committee policy, is that we allow families to select a preferred elementary school for their child to attend. That happens typically during the kindergarten enrollment process, where they tell us which of the 6 elementary schools they prefer. There is a hometown guarantee associated with that, which guarantees a student from Boxborough, if they want to attend school in Boxborough, they can choose from any of the Boxborough elementary schools. If they are from Acton and they want to attend school in Acton, they can choose from any of the Acton elementary schools, and they're guaranteed an Acton elementary school. We often only equate the hometown guarantee with Boxborough, but it actually is a universal guarantee for all students, that if they want to, they have the right to attend school in the community in which they live. It absolutely creates complications for the transportation system. We have a reasonably large number of families who live in North Acton who choose to go to school in Boxborough. That means that, just by way of example, because it's probably the easiest example to understand, I think we can only put about 15 students on that bus in order to keep the bus route under an hour. And we do cap our bus routes at a certain point, because we don't want elementary kids sitting on buses for more than an hour. Typically, it's about 45 minutes as a guidance for a route. So because the distance is so far, you now have to go under capacity on your school buses. So again, it's a complicating factor, but we have a number of considerations across the district that all fall into that category, that are all driven by this concept of open enrollment. It does mean that the open enrollment policy does mean our kids spend more time on a bus than they would otherwise. I will also note that there have been some changes in patterns over time of when families come into the district. We surveyed our seniors last year. This came out in the senior surveys, because there was a question around, when did you start at AB? Only about 50% of our seniors told us that they started in Acton Boxborough in kindergarten. So which means about half don't, and are coming in at some other point in their educational career. We have an open enrollment process, in which about 95% of families, I think, get their first choice if they go in through the kindergarten lottery. That process, though, then shifts after kindergarten, and you're placed into whatever available school has space at that grade level. And so, we call it open enrollment, but it really only applies to the kindergarten lottery. And then after that, you can tell us the preference, and if we have it, we are certainly going to grant that preference. But it really is much more on a space available basis than it is pure family choice. I will tell you that this is an absolutely long history and tradition in this community of being able to choose elementary schools. Our families in the district have very, very close ties to elementary school, and when I was entering, our seniors who graduated often still talked about, I was a McCarthy Town kid, or I was a Miriam kid, or I was a Douglas kid, or I was a Gates kid, or I was a Conant kid. Like, our kids identify with the elementary school that they went to more than I've seen in any other community, because the process of choosing something increased the level of buy-in into the school community. It was a very, very successful program for this community for a long time, and I don't want to downplay the ties that so many people here have to that. I will say that, post-pandemic, we have done a lot in terms of making sure we have equitable educational outcomes for students, and that means our curriculum is more standardized across our elementary schools than it ever was before. McCarthy Town originally, and then Miriam, formed because they wanted to do something different for families in response to what families wanted at the time. And so McCarthy Town became an arts integration school. Miriam was formed by a group of educators who then got together and wanted to do something that was very educator-driven, and was responsive to the families that they served. And so you had really unique school cultures evolve. And while it was responsive to many families in that school, there were also other families who said, that's not what I want, though I don't want an arts integration school. And that was really now, I wasn't here. I may look like it, but I wasn't here at the time. But that was really the genesis of why everyone got to choose, because we wanted to preserve the integrity of being able to do something different, but recognized not everyone wanted something different. Some people just wanted elementary school. And so some schools were seen as traditional schools, others were seen as, different types of schools and things like that, and it just evolved over time. It also led to some real inequities in terms of the outcomes for kids across schools, that we have also been trying to find what's the right balance of being able to have a unique climate and culture of a school and decision-making where your educators are responsive to the students in front of them, and making sure that the school you attend doesn't help determine your educational outcomes as a school district. And so that's been the balance. The pandemic accelerated a lot of that work because we needed to support kids across the district. We also, for the first time ever, were pulling a large number of teachers out of their home schools, and now they were working together in a remote school. And so you had this melding of ideas from Miriam, McCarthy Town, Gates, Conant, Blanchard, but yet they were now working together in a school that had never existed before and creating something new. And then 1 year later, they all went back to their schools with all these wild and crazy ideas that teaching may not be completely different in every school, right? And so you had this germination of ideas out of the pandemic that probably created some more similarities than had previously existed. Any idea that we're going to transition out of that needs to think community-wide about the importance of community and what we want for kids. It also needs to consider there's no one model of how districts choose to run elementary schools. Some are neighborhood-based, and if you look at a map of where our schools fall, it is right along we are remarkably consistent, right along 111. We do not have neighborhood schools. In fact, we just did visioning in, I think, 2016 around how we wanted to organize ourselves and committed to, we want these, this choice program in schools. That led to the creation of the Boardwalk campus and this idea of we can co-join twins, and we can make that work. So we've actually constructed it in our very recent history to continue the model that we have. We don't have a neighborhood-based model, and it would be a really long and tiring and extremely challenging process to create neighborhood districts from what we have, with consideration for income levels as you draw districts, and not creating one school that has, only rental or condo properties and another school that has only the wealthiest homes in the community. There's just lots to consider. There are some schools that are neighborhood schools in districts. Others create grade bands of schools. So, like Hopkinton, Bedford, and I think Westford all organize elementary schools on a grade band method. So you might have a K2 school, you might have a 3-5 school, a 6 school. There's just different ways of doing things. There's no inherent one way is right, one way is wrong. The grade band model is obviously a lot more transitions between school, and yet kids actually travel together from the time they're kindergarten through 12th grade, which could be a great thing or not, right? So lots of different things. It's complicated. I also think one of the things that you would need to think about is the financial implications of how you transition out of that. If you choose to do it all at once, you're going to see immediate cost savings. If you do that over, the most logical is you just do it over a 7-year period, and you create the new plan, and then every kindergarten class essentially goes into the new plan, and you let students kind of go through what they're doing. One, you're going to end up with families potentially going to different schools and siblings. Two, you probably are now running 2 different systems of bus routes and not just one. I don't think it's exactly 2, because I think the routing software will solve some of that for you, but probably not all of it. So I think there's also a potential to incur additional cost if you create a run-out period. You could say, 5th and 6th grade get to stay in their schools for 2 years, and your early grades get to stop. There's just so many limitless options for how you would configure things that it would require a significant study committee. And I would say to school committee, if you want to pursue something like this, I actually, personally would recommend that you form like a task force that includes some school committee members, some administrators, some educators, and then families, and quite honestly, members of the broader community and our finance committees to help study something like that, and community representatives, and really engage in at least a 12-month study of something like that to think about, do we want to move away from it or not? And then if we do, what would be the recommendations for how we could move forward from that? I just think it's a complicated enough and important enough issue, and impactful enough issue that it requires some significant planning and thought. Similarly, school closure, I'll transition a little bit. So one of the things that came out of a request from school committee is to look at, and I think it was in response to some community talk of, maybe you should just close an elementary school. So I explored that with our leadership team. I think solely for the reasons of the age of the facility and the need for some renovation, Conant has been the discussion as a possibility for a school closure. We go over some assumptions, and I'll share some financial information. So, one, in modeling this out, we eliminated overhead costs, which include, utilities, and then I'm so sorry, administrative team, but custodial and administrative and office expenses. Those go into the overhead category. We did not carry forward specialist positions like art, music, PE, library, because based on the number of sections we had space for in the other schools, we would have capacity within the teacher schedules to be able to cover those sections. We eliminated student support positions, including a nurse, counselor, literacy, and math specialists, because to try and maintain them actually would just create inequities, and there's no way to have that logically make sense. And then what we did is we did a space analysis across the district of anything that was like the size of a classroom, and figured out how many sections we could carry forward. And we also did bring all of our special education and English language education positions forward, because we have some pretty significant programming for students at Conant, and need to make sure we provide the supports that are necessary. So those were the starting assumptions for a test fit of what this could save. So I did this, what would be the reasons for potentially looking at a school closure, and what would be the reasons why maybe you'd have to be cautious in that? Overall, we could reduce operating costs by about $1.4 million by closing a school. It would also avoid future capital costs, potentially. We could preserve 10 of the existing sections at Conant. I think it has 19 sections currently, right? Thank you. It has 19 sections currently. We could preserve 10 of those sections and relocate them to other elementary schools. You would obviously relocate 400 students. Just be transparent about that. Class sizes would remain within, but at the very top of school committee guidelines, if we did that. I think one of the things I looked at was what are our enrollment trends projected out to be. We are projected to be relatively stable, but somewhat increasing over the next 5 to 7 years. We don't know what's going to happen after that. So at least in the Acton schools, that seems to be the trend. Concerns that I have, or that we raised, and I actually have a much longer list of concerns too, but I'm just going to share the top ones. Conant is the single most requested school in the district consistently, and we just talked about the history of school choice and how we've chosen to do business. If that is really what we want, then closing the most requested school doesn't seem to make sense from that lens. Conant is among the highest performing elementary schools in the state, and I will say in the nation. Last year, I had the opportunity to travel with 2 of Conant's teachers down to Washington, D.C. to receive a National Blue Ribbon Award, for high performance. So clearly, things are going well at Conant, and typically when districts choose to close schools, it's not because they're extremely high performing. Has our largest multilingual population in the district. Out of the 400 or so students that Conant has, 70 receive multilingual services, and a much, much higher number come from homes whose primary language is not English. It is our largest, it's not our largest, it has a very large population of students with some significant disabilities in one of the programs. We showed you some of the programs and the cost benefit of having programs and maintaining them. Maintaining stability in programming is also important to have student success. It serves a majority minority population. This is a community that feels safe in going to Conant. They look to Conant because they feel like they can fit in our schools and are very successful there. And I think that's a strong consideration we need to think about. Transferring students and families would likely have a major impact on open enrollment. If families select one of our schools, they chose that school for a reason, by and large. If you now split them up over 5 other schools, for whatever reason, that's not the school they wanted. They wanted Conant for a reason. They chose it, and they're there. If you now have, a fifth of every elementary school's population who didn't want what that school was selling in the first place, I think it's going to drastically impact this concept of open enrollment. Because every school in the district, it's not just as easy as closing one school and transferring kids. Bringing in 20% of a new population actually requires re-envisioning the entire core values of that school. Because what you assumed now is no longer what is relevant to you in the moment. If we do trend upward, we are going to have a space problem if we close a school. We can fit the 10 classrooms and we'd be at the top of school committee guidelines, but if and when we trend upward, that's going to become a problem for us, and I do worry about this idea of closing a school, I don't think that if you close a school and then try and reopen it, I am fairly confident it's going to have to become compliant with all of the current code that Conant is not. And so, it might feel like we're avoiding that cost, but it could trigger more costs down the road. So I think there's a cost-benefit analysis to that where I don't want to make a rash decision around it either. So, that's another one that I think would require some study. I also, have tossed around the idea in my mind of what happened if, say, the community comes back and says, we don't necessarily believe we need to continue open enrollment. At that point, might you consider closing one school because you're condensing the rest of the district anyway? You could actually layer multiple strategies on top of this that don't feel like you're targeting a specific population within the school. I think when our administrative team came, and this is going to talk to a little bit of the philosophy of the B budget, we knew that we'd have to close 17 classrooms across the district, which is going to move a couple of hundred students, right? And we know that that's the impact of that B budget. If we close a school, we're moving 400 students. And we're making one part of our community feel targeted for some reason. And I don't think that that's worth the the challenge of that. Quite honestly, I think our leadership team was fairly confident that we'd rather move 200 students or 250 students and not close a school than have to close a school and move 400 students and have a community feel like they're isolated and targeted and not equally valued. So that was really where we came to, but I'll turn it over to you, Adam, and happy to answer questions, but it's more about your discussion.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to ask one quick question on the busing. For FY24, you said we were back up to 37 routes. Does that include the reduction of the 4 leases that we're looking at for this coming year?
Yeah, the routes themselves will still be 37 for next year.
Okay.
With the other 4 being gone.
Great. Okay, that was nagging at me for a while. So we have basically, let me go back to my agenda, 3 main topics to discuss for the rest of the afternoon, which is an hour and 15 if I keep to our 3:30 stop time, which Jen has told me I have to. There's a quick sort of round of questions and discussions around the structural changes. There's then open questions and answers about anything in the line item budget. And then there's a discussion of our A and B budgets and next steps. So I think I want to make sure that while people still have a lot of these structural changes in their mind, that they get an opportunity to ask some questions about that. What I would ask is that maybe we hold some of the deeper discussion about what we do next with those for the end, and we'll talk to that as we discuss sort of our A and B budget options. And, I think more importantly, what we've heard from the people who are at the tables behind us, what are the structural changes that we're going to make a budget that's sustainable in the future years? This is going to be most likely a one-time, addition to our funding, but we have to make sure that we then take action to make that sustainable. So I'd rather have that conversation all towards the end as we discuss everything. So what I'm asking for now from the committee, and then we'll also go to the rest of the boards and the public, what are specific questions, not necessarily statements or discussion topics, that you have around reserve usage, health insurance, transportation, start times, open enrollment, and school closure? 6 items that Peter laid out. Tori, and then Liz.
Thanks for that summary. It, again, gives us some hope that we can get things better. I'm wondering, having read the fiscal year 18 transportation discussion, there's a lot of great analysis in there, what we think the possibility of going back and revalidating facts and assumptions, looking at the 5 courses of action that are in there, surveying the community, and getting this turned around before we have to go to an election and a town meeting. What's that possibility?
You mean in the next month and a half? 2 months? I think I just answered the question without
flexible.
words. Look, you're not. You're not going to go through that level of analysis while we're also transitioning to new health insurance, right? I mean, quite honestly, health insurance is our focus right now, and it needs to be our focus because it's the savings that can come the fastest. The transportation piece, if you want to pursue it, there's no way you're going to pursue that and make the community happy. It needs to be something, if you want to pursue it, we can make the change, but it's not going to be with a substantial amount of community input because we don't have time to go through that type of a process. So I just think it's recognizing that we can make anything happen on any timeline. It's just the number of people we disappoint and the level at which we disappoint them that they can or cannot tolerate.
Before you respond to that, I'll just say that this committee has taken action like that in the past, and the backlash from the community has been significant.
It's just the thing that is out there that is the best researched, and there's going to be backlash no matter what we do.
Yeah, can I just respond quick? Sure. Look, you could say, look, okay, the priority is high school start times. High school, you're going to be latest. Elementary schools, you're taking the early time. That preserves the research around sleep and start times. You will disappoint a lot of elementary families by now getting out that early. They're going to struggle with childcare in the afternoons. We can provide a certain amount of childcare, but we have limits to the number of staff we can hire as well. So you're transferring some of that burden of the afternoons onto elementary families by preserving high school start times. I mean, it's, you can only analyze a problem so many ways before you keep coming back to the same solutions. And then it's just making hard decisions around what we want to do.
All right, are you good, Tori? Okay. I have three specific questions about three different structural potential changes. The first is, and I know that we've somewhat talked about this, I just want to make sure that it's really clear, what, if any, savings would we realize if we stopped picking up students within 1.5 miles of the school?
I know we figured out the number, but we really wouldn't have any savings because we still have other students that might be within K to 3 in those same areas, so we still have to drive those same routes.
But doesn't it take longer to like stop on them, I guess is my question too. And also, is it within 1.5 miles of any school or their particular school? I just want to make sure we analyze every little opportunity for.
Yeah, our transportation department actually did that. I think we included a couple maps even in the last packet, right? But, you know, the challenge is, if we stop doing that, we're still probably going to stop at just about every stop we currently have. The only difference would be we'd allow the kindergartners through third graders to get on the bus, and then the fourth and sixth graders would have to walk by the bus and keep going. I wish that it was going to return some savings because it decreases our reimbursable percentage, but the reality is we might get something out of it, but not a significant amount. And I know that there was a good legitimate questions from CPAC around had we included special education students, because we are required to provide transportation. We had already made that assumption in the early part of our modeling.
Excellent, thank you. The second is about open enrollment. If we did go in, you know, that direction, do you estimate that there could potentially be significant savings in terms of just finding efficiencies to having sort of like, you know, a unified elementary culture across all the different, you know, whether we just went without open enrollment or went to the banded or what have you?
So Tricia, can I call on you for a minute? So Tricia just came to us from another community where she had a similar sized school. Tricia, how many buses serve Conant right now?
Can you grab a mic, please?
Oh yeah, I can repeat it too. So yeah, well, she's going up.
Thank you.
I'll let you hear this from the source too. So the question was, how many buses serve Conant currently?
I believe it's 15.
Okay, and your previous school, you had a roughly similar enrollment?
Yeah, we had about 40 kids less.
Okay, and how many buses?
3. It was a neighborhood school, and there were kids who got dropped off and kids who walked and rode their bikes, and we had 3 buses. Yeah.
So we obviously don't have neighborhood schools, so we might have more buses than that because of the travel time. That's just illustrative of this overall concept of what open enrollment does. Now, in that community too, I will also say that they weren't required to provide transportation for every student because it was not a regional district. So there's some nuances there that might drive the change. This is one of those things, why the reason I'm not modeling this out for you myself. It's well beyond my ability to guess on the back of a napkin.
Excellent, thank you. And my third question is, if we were to close Conant, are there still costs that we would have to incur just for, you know, having this property? I'm not sure where the ownership lies, if we would still be responsible for taxes or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, we, you know, explored a number of different options. We actually thought about, you know, turning it over to community ed to be able to actually expand programming and potentially, you know, centralize aftercare with more classrooms and, you know, different opportunities as a way of trying to like technically keep it open so that it wasn't a closed school building. We also toyed with, you know, selling it back to the town of Acton for like $500 million.
By right, we get to buy it for only $1.
You know, I thought, I knew Jason would appreciate more property acquisitions on the town side. No, but seriously, you know, like, you know, there might be a use in Acton. Maybe Acton would want to repurpose it for a senior center or something like that because it is a ranch-style building. You know, we have explored different options. The challenge is once you, like if we turned it back to the town of Acton with a new purpose, if our enrollment goes up and we have to reopen it, we're really in a tough bind because we don't have property and we don't have a building.
And I'll just add to that the last building project that we worked on, we're still working on, this is about a 7-year period. So we're already talking about looking at our enrollments over the next 5 years being flat, but if we don't consider what might be 7 to 10 years out and start thinking about that in the next few years, we could be in an equal bind. Yanshin.
I have 2 questions. Number one is that, talking about the closure of a school, I remember a couple of school committee meetings ago that during the meeting, Peter, you talked about the loss of talent. So on the pro and con chart, I didn't see that, if we do go for school closure, what happens to those educators and administrators?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a similar impact to what we see in the B budget, which is why I didn't necessarily put it on a chart, because the bottom line is if, we close Conant, we're going to lose, the administration on that side, plus, a certain number of teachers, but other teachers who are senior are going to get retained and move to other schools. You would lose the art, music, PE, counselor, things like those types of positions, nurse. But you also have people with seniority who might move, and I'm not sure it's actually a markedly different outcome on the overall district talent drain than would be a B budget.
I'm sorry, I have another question.
All right, we're going to go Yanshin, then we're going to go to Andrew, and then we're going to go to Lakshmi.
My second question is, I took some time I read oh my God, I can't speak English today. I took some time to read the report cards yesterday, and I know we've been talking about Conant because the facility is old. But I do want to recognize that in our district, there are schools that are high performing, there are schools that are not high performing, there are schools that are sanctuaries for minorities and certain people, and there are schools that are not. So have we ever thinking out of the box, that instead of closing a school based on the facility, can we think about closing a school that's perhaps not the highest performing school at the moment, and we will be able to retain the talent and sort of regroup?
So I think there's a lot of complexity to what makes a school high performing, including the students that it serves, right, and the needs of individual students that can make, just looking at, performance, one element of data. Like Gates right now has our smallest enrollment, but is that something where, you would look at that school, the answer to Gates is probably no, because it's actually the second most requested school typically, or first with Conant. The only difference is we actually made Gates small so that we could build the new school. We cut off whole sections of Gates while we constructed the Boardwalk campus. So now we're rebuilding the size of Gates. You get into the other schools, and people selected every school for a very unique and individual reason. I actually think whatever school you choose to close, it's going to feel like that population of families is being targeted for some reason, right? And the other complexity I think that could happen is if you choose to preserve one school, even if it's not its building, and replace another school with that population, I think there could be long-standing resentment from the school that gets closed toward the population that takes over. And I'm not sure that would be the healthiest thing in our community. So I think there's layers of complexity that I worry about to that too, but we've certainly tried to explore that in our minds of what are the nuances to that, but ultimately we just didn't think that was the right way to go either.
Andrew.
Thank you. My turn. I promise not to talk too much. I think that a lot of these are budget opportunities, but the structural and policy and cultural impacts need a hell of a lot more attention than we have today. Peter, you said something about taking time to study this. I think it's important. With the exception of HIT, our risk pool is too low. The hit we took was direct impact of pandemic, direct impact of people not going to the doctor enough, and it impacted us. Getting to GIC is great. With open enrollment, I think culture is important, and we moved away from many of the key moments and core memories of these kids. Families chose these schools because each has a different personality, and any shift from the elementary choice would demand huge friction and make the whole mascot theme thing seem really tame. My family lived in a community that was redistricted, and I can't tell you the troubles and the complaining and the gnashing of teeth and the very loud requests for accommodations that were inescapable. But also on school closure, I really think that this is a bad idea. Replacing Conant with closets is insulting to the families that have called it home and the students who've thrived there. Also, just quickly, the 15 to 3 buses is kind of a false equivalency. We're not set up as a neighborhood district, we have centralized schools, and you can't say that because we would move one school away, we'd suddenly not need, 12 different buses. Make it clear that what we're saying is that if we were to close the school, we would insult the families, we'd close our most recognized school, we'd imperil the learning of our majority-minority population, our multilingual population, and our disability students. We'd break our school committee policy around class sizes. We, in turn, would impact the learning of students in the remaining schools, and we'd create a demand to reopen another school again in a few years. And we got to remember, it's the bathwater that needs to go down the drain. So
Question in there?
No, I didn't. I was
All right,
just
this was the
upset.
question time.
I told you, I was trying not to. Can we not do this? How about that? Yeah. No, I think, can we adjust these things for more term? We don't have enough time to understand the impact of all of this stuff.
Lakshmi.
So 2 observations and a question. First of all, I think what Yanshin said, that there are high-performing schools and there are not high-performing. I think that is, if it is really true, I think that is something that we should work towards. I think all of our kids should get about the same. The second observation is I'm really happy that health insurance is going to be addressed. The question part is, we are here today to address budget. So school closure, transportation, open enrollment, they look like long-term project propositions. I don't think these will lead to what we are trying to achieve today. So I'm not sure if they belong to the agenda today.
I will answer that one, because I think that's an excellent question. The 2 that we did talk about, so reserve usage, and I don't want to discount reserve usage because it is a structural change that we'll make.
No, I didn't say reserve usage. I'm sorry. That probably is true.
So between reserve usage and health insurance trust, those are 2 structural changes that we know that we can make today that should, in my view, buy us time to do the other ones. The reason we're talking about the other structural changes today is because the people sitting at the tables behind you have challenged us to say, hey, if we're going to ante up the extra money this year that you need to keep your facilities running, how do we know that you're going to structurally solve some of these problems? And so it's important for us to deliberate that now so that we make sure that everybody understands that we're doing stuff in the short term, we're being responsive to the needs of the community, and to be very clear and upfront about the amount of time and energy it's going to take to look at those bigger things. We have to have the conversation now because we have to start the work now, knowing that it's going to take a while before we see those results. And we don't have a lot of time, knowing the financial situations of the towns, to make those changes to make sure that we don't have to, that we're not in the same place again. So I think that's my answer to the question is, yeah, I agree with you. Some of these things are not going to happen for next year, but I think it's super important that we start to talk about that now and show some action, and then I will be pushing our committee at the end of the afternoon to take some action to show that we are considering those changes for the long term. We've probably got next year covered, but it's the out years that we still need to figure out.
Okay, I didn't think it was in an actionable state. It looked like a concept.
Any more committee questions? Leela, and then Jason is chomping at the bit.
Well, Jason can go real quick because it's just a brief comment. I want to be clear that my understanding of our schools is that we might have schools that, by the metrics, perform not as well as maybe some of the other ones, but it's not like we have underperforming schools. I think we have a district that performs quite highly. So correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding.
Thank you. Jason.
Thank you. First, I agree with what you had just said about the structural changes are mandatory. You can't just look at a one-year time frame. We absolutely need to see the long-term frame. You may get through this override. You're not going to get through multiple overrides in a short period of time. Secondly, did I hear you correctly that closing Conant would absolutely require the redistribution of 9 segments to be absorbed into all the other districts, all the other classrooms throughout the district?
Well, when you say require, what do you mean by that?
You said there were 19 segments in Conant. There's room in the other buildings to absorb 10, to take 10 segments and just bulk move them. And then that would leave 9 segments that would have to be redistributed with the subsequent loss of the teacher, correct?
That was the assumption that we made in that model.
Fine. So please stop talking about closing Conant, because taking 9 teachers rather than deciding to close Conant and get rid of 9 teachers in Conant take a look at the entire district, district-wide. If you lose 9 teachers, if you find the 9 teachers that you wish to let go, and I realize that's never easy and never fun and not a fun thing to do, but those 9 teachers represent 90% of your cost savings from closing Conant. So there's no purpose in closing Conant. Also, by all means, if you close Conant, we would like it back for our dollar. Nextly, you know your enrollment is going to change in the future. And finally, when we built the most recent twin school, the Boardwalk School, one of the ideas that was talked about in the future was potentially having 2 middle schools instead of a junior high in the future. So don't cut off your nose to spite your face to save $1.2 million in 1 year. It's not sustainable. As for the other suggestions, by all means, start the process now. Absolutely start the process now. If you can do the elementary schools starting early, as early as next year, to Tori's point, do it. Having recently had children in the school district in the different groups, the younger kids are up at 5 in the morning anyway. And if all of a sudden you've got a child care problem in the afternoon, this is an opportunity for community education. You can make money on the other side. So by all means, please move. Please move on these. And while I realize closing school choice is absolutely not something you should do quickly, and absolutely not something you should do in a vacuum, and you absolutely need to take a year to do it, have that conversation sooner rather than later. Change the busing right away if you can. Have the conversation about school choice. Get that going, see if people are willing to pay extra to keep it. If they're not, they're not. And lastly, stop talking about closing Conant. There is no upside to closing Conant. You're
Jason, fear-mongering. thank you. I just want to be clear, no one has talked about closing Conant. We've asked to have it evaluated, and that language worries me because there is rumors in the community that say we are closing the school. And so I just want to be very clear. I just want to say that
we just
we are
spent
not.
20 minutes talking about closing Conant.
We're considering it. It is under consideration, but I think we need to be very sensitive to those families who are in that part of the town and in that school.
Please take it off the table, is my advice.
Christy.
I've been part of the school district since many of these changes happened, and I can tell you, as part of your looking forward, I've seen how much the schools changed. My kids went to McCarthy Town. It was a special place when they started. It was like most every other elementary school by the time they were done 9 years later. Just the changes for district-wide, what you were allowed to celebrate, what had to happen in curriculum, along with standardized testing and everything. The teachers just stopped doing more of the innovative type teaching that they did. So I would really love to encourage a deep look into open enrollment. I also personally miss having neighborhood schools. We don't know the kids around us because they all go to different schools. We knew some from being on the bus with them, but that's it. Which raises my question I would love a mathematical financial answer to is, do we know what savings would be incurred if half the kids who say they're going to take the bus but don't, didn't bother signing up for it?
I don't know exactly what the savings would be. Jen and I can kind of try to analyze it, but my guess is the bus stops are the bus stops. We set them up, and we still have to go by those same bus stops. Whether the kids get on the bus or not, we still have to stop. It really all comes down to, in the beginning of the year, we send out the notification, are you going to take transportation? I guess that we just ask. So many seem to say yes, and there are an awful lot of families that don't actually take advantage of it. And I do understand that they want to say yes just in case they need that bus. But I do ask them to please let us know, more accurately, possibly for next year, because maybe we could have savings, maybe we could have less routes.
John, Tony, any questions from Boxborough?
I think ours are more on the AB budget side, so we'll wait on that.
Just want to look real quick at the Boxborough Select Board. Anybody there have any questions at this point? Dave, come on up. Make sure the mic is on, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm David McKiernan, by the way, for those of you who don't know me from the Boxborough Select Board. So the first one is about the insurance. My question, Peter, is who's on the hook for making sure this gets done and gets done right? I'm not looking back to what happened, but who's doing this work?
You mean who's actually leading it right now?
Right. Who are the people that are involved to make sure this all gets done and gets done well?
So-
I assume you're one of them.
Andrew is our rep to Acton Health Insurance Trust.
Andrew, okay.
So he's involved in that manner. One of the things we're going to be talking about is, right now on a staff side, Andrew Shen, myself, and Sherry have all been, the leads on health insurance. We brought on an attorney who works with school districts who have experience around health insurance trusts and disbanding health insurance trusts. So we have an attorney. We're actually looking at consulting because we found out from Gallagher that if the school district wants information direct from Gallagher, they want to charge us for that. So we're actually looking at maybe with Cook and Company, having them come in and advise us. And then we've worked with all 3 of our unions. We worked with a retiree rep. MTA has actually sent their insurance expert to consult with us as well about this transition. And then what we're going to be talking about at the next school committee meeting. So I'm not going to talk about it now, but what we will talk about is as we look to disband health insurance trust, the 2 entities, Town of Acton and Regional School District, are going to have to operate as independent political organizations for the purposes of health insurance. That means the school committee is going to need to be involved with the collective bargaining around the transition to health insurance. So it's going to shift the role of school committee and shift the role of Town of Acton a little from rather than being able to work jointly on this to being required to work independently. And that's actually a function of GIC in particular. The district is considered its own political entity.
So the GIC would be just for the region or the region and the town?
We're exploring GIC independently as the Acton-Boxborough Regional School District.
Okay. Next question I have, and I want to start by congratulating Conant. All those things that were there, it really sounds fabulous. But if all those students were to leave Conant and go to other schools, how close are all those other schools at in terms of their maximum capacity?
Blanchard is pretty close to capacity right now, but we probably could repurpose 1 room potentially, maybe a 2nd room at Blanchard. The Boardwalk campus, because we had intentionally shrunk gates because we had to build Boardwalk, and Boardwalk is constructed on top of 4 of the classrooms of gates. So because we intentionally closed that, we have a couple of classroom spaces still available at Boardwalk, which we plan for future expansion. Additionally, if we wanted to close the STEAM labs at Boardwalk campus, we would just not have STEAM labs anymore, repurpose those. We would probably do the same thing at Miriam McCarthy Town, where we would have to close STEAM labs and not offer that anymore in order to be able to fit classrooms in. It's not pretty what would have to take place, and we'd be losing an awful lot of educational opportunities in the schools to fit the classrooms. But the question was, what could you fit in those buildings? And that was the answer. I mean, I think we went with pretty draconian analysis of how we would fit everyone in, but it would certainly pack all of our schools to the brim.
Right, and so I asked that question because it doesn't make sense to me to close it down only to have to go back and say, well, we need it again, right? Yeah. So, that's just my opinion. Okay, the school buses now, I get quite a few of them going by my street, Picnic Street, and they all have these nicely shaded windows. I can't see how many kids are on that bus. Are these buses full?
Well, maybe there's a reason.
Maybe there is. Buses that leave the school, are they all full when they leave the school?
No, they're not full to capacity, but we do have to create the routes based on the families and the families that say that their children are going to take the bus. So we have to assume that everyone that says they're going to take the bus every day is going to get on the bus. And if they don't, they're not full, but we still have to have them available if they decide to come.
So we couldn't float a couple of smaller half-size buses to save on diesel and the atmosphere? I'm just asking.
No, what would probably happen, like let's say we had a 47-passenger bus or a 29-passenger bus, and all of a sudden all those families that said they were going to come and then didn't, they decided to come that day, and then we didn't have enough room on the bus. We have to
Yeah.
have the big bus to be available for them.
Okay, okay. And my last question is about the school choice. I don't mean within Acton, but from other towns. Do we have kids coming in from the other towns?
We have a small handful of legacy students from when the district participated in school choice previously, but the district hasn't for a number of years participated in school choice. We explored the possibility of school choice. You know, we know our average per pupil expenditure is about $18,000. If you take a student from another school district, you get $5,000 a student to educate the student, which can seem appealing. And quite honestly, we all called around to different districts to kind of understand their experience with school choice. And the overwhelming feedback actually came, you know, through Jen Truslow from the area special ed coordinators that said, don't do this. You're increasing your risk of high special education costs substantially,
Yep.
and you're not going to recoup those costs fully.
Okay.
So that was our biggest area that blew up on us this year, so we don't want to increase risk in that pool.
That's my last question. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
Sure.
Acton. David.
Yes, if we think that long-term enrollment would justify the renovation or rebuilding of Conant, I think we should at least consider now closing Conant, renovating or rebuilding it, and repopulating it. Renovating or rebuilding the Conant building will cost many millions, probably 1/3 less than renovating or rebuilding an occupied building. And now we're at relatively low enrollment would be the time to start that if we thought it was going long-term. So I think there'd be significant savings in that. Again, assuming that we are doing that long-term, because we're going to have to put those students somewhere. We shift them all to the left side of the building and renovate the right, and shift them all to the right side of the building and renovate the left, which is extremely disruptive to students. Or we rent an office building and put them in them. Any of these things cost huge amounts of money. We know about this to some extent from the Boardwalk campus, right? And the Boardwalk campus was at least a separate building. So anyway, I think that we should consider something like that.
Thanks, David. Alyssa?
Thanks. I just want to talk a little bit about school choice. I wonder if somebody, maybe Peter, could reconcile what we just heard, that were we to close Conant, which would effectively eliminate school choice, we are putting each elementary school that remains would have 20% of the population that didn't choose that school. I'd like to see that reconciled with the statistic from the senior survey that only 50% of graduates have selected their school. And just, this is personal, anecdotal. I identified with my elementary school. I didn't choose it. I went to it because I was in a neighborhood. And I know that Acton has a long history, even longer than with school choice, with moving kids around, right? There was a point in time when we didn't have a high school, so our students were going to Concord High School. There were a number of years where students, you know, like one grade was in the fire station in the center of town. One year, there was an elementary grade that went to Maynard, and I don't know if it was because of fires in the school or whatever, but kids are resilient. You know, we've learned a lot that they have high needs, but we also know that they're resilient, and it's not going to be the end of the world if we have to shuffle them around.
Thanks, Alyssa. Go ahead, John.
Just a quick question on the process. So are you waiting for additional information before the school committee can elect to go or no go on these options? Because I would think they would need to know the value associated with making one of these moves, right?
Yeah, my intention is to facilitate that conversation with the committee in a little bit and figure out what our next steps are. But I think if I'll foreshadow sort of my thinking, there are some things that we know we can do this year. there are things that we're going to need to take action on now that are going to be needed for the out years. And so I think the goal here will be to get some consensus from the committee about what those next steps are for those out year items.
Right, but the committee should have some financial projections with regard to the benefit of each one of these actions, should it not?
Yes, they should, and I think that's why we need to get started now, because we can't make an informed decision without having that information, but we can't get that information until we sort of formally start that process, is where I'm at. All right, so it's 2:48. I'm going to sort of combine two parts here. Amanda, you don't need to go back to your seat just yet. I'm going to basically start now backwards. I'm going to open up to the general public any questions that you have around this first topic, but also any single line item budget question. So I'm going to have both of those. I want to start with the public, give that opportunity to members of the public to come up to the microphone, make any questions or comments about what we've heard around structural changes, or any questions or comments about specific line items. Those are going to be the two things. I'll give us until about 3 o'clock for that, and then I'll pull in Finance Committee's Select Board opportunity to same area there, line item specific questions, any generic questions, and then we'll come into the school committee and begin the deliberation. Thanks, Amanda.
Hi, my name is Amanda Bailey. For those who haven't yet been watching, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Special Education Parent Advisory Council. We need to stop saying everyone gets a choice, because there are absolutely students in this district who do not have a choice where they attend elementary school. We are not required to have special education, specialized programs in every single building. We don't have to have a Connections here, there, everywhere. But for the students who do need to go to Connections, that's it. They don't have a choice. They don't get to rank. They don't participate in that lottery. We need to stop saying it. We need to consider this as an equity issue when we start talking about looking at open enrollment. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Mike Gowan. Excuse me, Mike Gowan, Harris Street. I know the issues about Conant have to do with the structural integrity, what it's going to need in order to bring it up to code so that it's a serviceable building. Aren't we facing a similar issue with the Boxborough School? Isn't that in the same kind of mix in that it's got issues that need to be addressed?
No, we had actually done we had thought maybe we needed, I mean, all of our schools have issues, right? Like, we all have issues.
Especially as we age.
I have issues too. All of our schools have issues that need to be addressed. We have high school rooftop units that are well past the use of their life. We have, the building here rains, when it rains, things like that. But the Blanchard roof actually was in reasonably good condition, so even though that was projected that it would need to be done, that's good. I think the issues at Blanchard that rise to the level now are really paving. The playground is aging, things like that, but the paving is reaching a place where there's unsafe areas of the pavement that need to be rebuilt, but the building itself, no, has not been considered like Conant.
When we did the first building project analysis, we looked at all the facilities, and one of the markedly different positions between Douglas, Gates, Conant, and then Blanchard were that Douglas, Gates, and Conant hadn't had any major capital work done on them in close to 50 years, whereas Blanchard had a number of capital projects done on it to expand and renovate and maintain. John.
John Peterson, 6 Jackson Drive. With respect to net use of reserves, I want to come back to this topic in Peter's remark that, part of this is about the discipline and the will to rebuild E&D. And so, when you look at things like the changes to the health insurance trust, which will be uncertain, I'm thinking at the time that we come to town meeting, this is going to leave you in a position during the year to ask the question, should that money be used to fill some things? I know there are lots of needs. I know there are things you'd love to do. Or should that money be used to rebuild reserve? And so I would just encourage that there be a very vigorous discussion around the desire to rebuild reserve. And in that regard, I do have one question related to the book, because one of the things that the committee did do is structure the budget so that reserves could be rebuilt in food service and community education. And my cursory review of those numbers says that that has been somewhat successful. So my question is, are those reserves in community ed and food service at target levels, and what are the implications of those positions with respect to the operating budget going forward?
So while we figure out the answer to your question, John, I'll make a comment here with regards to your frequent reminders for us to look at our net use of reserves, our turnbacks. One of the things that's very challenging as a school committee member who is the second longest standing school committee on the board, Ginny being the longest standing school committee, is we don't have a lot of institutional knowledge on our committee. And I think it's really hard for us to remember back to the days when reserves were good or reserves were bad. And so it's something that I think we need to encourage both longevity on the committee, but some way to memorialize some of those learnings. And if that includes having you come up and remind us from time to time, I think that's wonderful. But it clearly, there's a pretty big learning curve for the members of the school committee when it comes to municipal finance, which is not something that any of us are experts in, save maybe one of the municipal employees who's on our committee. So I think it's an important thing to sort of identify that we're trying our best and we look to the experts around us to help give us some guidance. But at the end, and I'll take ownership of this, it is the committee that decides what the budget is and how much of the reserves we choose to use each year and how many of the programs we wish to save. So I think that this will be a pretty remarkable learning moment for the committee as a whole in terms of how we manage our reserves in the future.
I noticed you stopped short of inviting me to run for re-election.
I did, yes. Two times up here is enough. Thanks, John.
Erin, can you talk to reserves for ComEd?
Sure. Erin Betez, I'm the Director of Community Education. I knew John would bring this up today. I had a feeling. Yes, we had some very scary days when COVID shut down all of our programs and we were still paying all of our staff and all of our commitments to district costs. At this point in time, Community Ed is contributing about $500,000 annually. I'm kind of going up, yeah. Partially in custodial salaries and partially for energy costs for our activities in the building. We are rebuilding our revolving funds. We just announced, I think at last week's school committee, that we're going to support the renovations of the 2 sets of tennis courts. We're happy to use that. It's coming out of the use of facilities fund that's been rebuilt. It will almost bring that fund down to zero. So then we're going to start building that up again and see how we can use that. So one thing that significantly changed, one of our biggest revenue generators is our extended day revolving fund. Last summer, I don't know if there are any parents here whose children attend extended day, we had to delay enrollments for families because we could not find people to work. And so we had to, on the fly to some extent, and based upon the money we had in our account, change some of our roles and create new benefited positions, which are much more costly. They did attract people to the positions. They have created more stability and better teams at our sites, and so our program is running better, but it's costing more than it used to. So that's going to be interesting to see the impact on the extended day revolving fund over time. That all said, things are charting in the right direction. Those funds continue to grow, and ultimately, the whole reason we're out there is to raise monies from our little programs and contribute them back. So,
thanks, Erin. Diane.
Hi. This could be a more general question because I tried to go over, most of the budget binder, but it's very lengthy. So I don't know whether or not you'll take questions beyond today, but like I'm just like randomly just reviving my my awareness of the athletic revolving. And I did look at this before, but it's like some of the cost variances are really crazy, and I don't really know what the story is behind that, and I know all these little things add up, but so I'm just wondering if this is a question that you'll take now, or if this is something that I can forward you through an email.
You tell us the line item. We've got a couple more minutes, and hopefully Sherry with her binder can give you some information.
Okay, so there's more than one line item, but in athletic event staff, the FY25 budget recommendation is $60K, but that's been as low as $29. It's those kinds of variances over time, and I know COVID probably had something to do with it, but it just raises a lot of questions for me.
I'll give it just a really broad, high-level answer, which is actually the answer to almost all of the athletic revolving account and athletic budget. The athletic revolving account has been underfunded by about $100,000, which is for a couple of years now. where the cost increases typically offset there have overrun the budget. It's almost all transportation related and post-COVID costs of trying to purchase things and everything else. We're proposing to raise the athletic fee, which is where the funding, large part of the funding of the revolving account comes from, to be able to bring that back into that budget. But what you see in terms of changes to expenditures is as that revolving account gets overrun on an annual basis and it gets close to zero, we've had to absorb those costs into the operating budget to be able to run the athletic program each year. So you're seeing some really wild fluctuations back and forth on an annual basis. It's because at the end of the last year, the finance director was moving money to try and make sure that we could cover the costs of athletics.
Okay.
So, but we're trying to solve that by increasing the fee by $100, which should stabilize the athletic revolving account and allow us to get back to a more normal budgeting process.
I see. Okay. May I make one more comment? Just this is about the Conant school. So you have a school that got a Blue Ribbon award nationally, and they get that because, among other things, they're closing achievement gaps, and this is something that schools all over the country are trying to do. You know, it's hard, and they're being successful at that. So it just with using just that lens, they have the misfortune in being in the school that's in the least great shape. So something's got to be done. But you better find a way to replicate that, because what is their secret sauce should be replicated. And you really don't want to dismantle that culture that's been built in that community that's so successful. That's something that we're striving to do in all of our schools, in every district in the Commonwealth. So just wanted to share that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Mike.
Hi, just a quick comment. Mike Balulescu, I'm the president of the Teachers Union and maybe a trendsetter bringing a lawn chair to the Budget Saturday. I just want to reflect quickly. There was such a warm round of applause for our educator panel today, and that was great to see. But I want to remind everyone here and the folks watching at home that those teachers were not here because they were voluntold. They were not here because their arm was twisted. They willingly and cheerfully gave up a Saturday and came quite prepared, I would say, because they understand the existential threat that our school district faces. They are scared for their colleagues, they are scared for their own jobs, and they are especially scared for their students because we realize the incredible damage not passing an override would do to our school district. So I just want to say on behalf of teachers, I really appreciate your applause, but everyone in this room and everyone at home, what we really need is your vote on April 30th and on May 6th at Acton Town Meeting and May 13th at Boxborough Town Meeting. We need to rally together, come together as one, as town leaders, as a community, pass an override, and show our teachers who are here on a Saturday that we have their backs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. All right.
Can I hit a couple of line items that I know there are questions?
Yes, while you do that, I just want to say that I'm going to do one more round out to the public, so anybody who's not at a table, and then we're going to no longer take questions from them. We'll do some questions from the folks at the tables. Peter, you've got a couple line items you want to highlight?
Sure. So Mike, some of the administrator salary increases you had a question on. So when we budget for salaries, we budget in February. We don't actually apply administrator salary increases until after the evaluations are done at the end of the year. And then we do salary increases. We also had a number of principals who were in interim roles last year who are now replaced with full-time people where we made adjustments to salaries after the budget process took place. I also, on an annual basis, especially where we brought in, a number of administrators across the district, look at kind of pay equity issues that we might see arise as we bring in people at different salaries and make adjustments. But that's all done at the end of the year after the budget process takes place. So what you're seeing in any administrator increases, we've carried forward all non-union staff at 3.25%. And if you see any increase beyond that, it's because there was something applied at the end of last year that was in addition to what had been budgeted, and so it has to get carried forward into the following budget. But that's, I know there were a couple lines on that, but it's all the same answer.
I've got many more.
I know, I figured I'd vamp in the silence and just go through.
Okay. Moving to the Acton table.
Thank you. Just one sort of overarching recommendation I'd like to have the school committee take into account. Where there are user fees, that are specific to individual people, please go ahead and raise them. I'm saying this as the parent of a rising senior who wants to bring his 20-year-old janky car to school next year. Where there are user fees such as athletic costs, senior parking, ADK, raise these user fees. $125 for ADK is a drop in the bucket compared to where we were just a couple of years ago. The athletic fees, absolutely raise them. This is a user fee. And for the privilege of parking in the senior lot versus riding the bus because they're going to reserve a spot on the bus anyway, by all means, raise those fees. Thank you.
I would like to second the fees point. There are resources available for students who cannot afford to pay the fees. There are ways for them to get access to the money. What I'm hearing from some, especially parents around town in support of the budget, is that for Acton residents who cannot pay their taxes, they should go look for the abatements through town. It's a heck of a lot easier for students to get fees than people having to deal with applying all of the various ways and looking at what they qualify for and dealing with the increases in taxes. To make it clear, the override amount right now is more than $100 that we're looking at for Acton per month for the average single-family home. That's a lot, that's life-changing for a lot of people. It's not big life-changing, but that's life-changing. So if we can just direct some of it towards the people who are using it more directly, it would be really beneficial.
Thank you. Boxborough table.
Yeah, can I just ask about the athletic fees? Have we considered all fees? I mean, for all extracurricular activities? It just seems like it's always athletic fees. I would ask the school committee to kind of rationalize all of the activities that are kind of extra, and then...
We did, John. So
price, okay.
As part of the fee presentation at our last school committee meeting, there was a proposal to increase pre-K tuition, all-day kindergarten tuition, activities fees, so there's a flat fee now for every student participating in activities, and then the athletics fees. So it was across the board fee increase, parking fees. Did I miss anything?
So
if there's anything we charge people money for, we're charging them more, and we're starting to add some more.
And that's net new for next year?
And that's in the budget for next year already.
Okay.
And one of the fees that you're planning to increase that I saw at your school committee budget was even for members of the debate and speech team. And as a parent who saw kids go on and do very well because of what they did in speech and debate, I was delighted to see that, because I think that was a wise move on your part. It's not just the athletics, it's all of the above. One other thing I would like to reiterate is something I guess Mike mentioned. We're listening to the people who are in the room because they're here. I'm also trying to listen to people who can't make it here today. And one of the people I talked to recently was a combat veteran who lives in Acton. I was stunned to discover that something like 4.8% of the population in Acton are veterans, which is 1.3 times larger than the typical Middlesex County community. So his wife is a teacher. That's why they came here. She's not sure if she's going to lose her job. So to the extent that our job is to try to bring clarity to say what's going to get cut and why, that will help that one veteran make a very hard decision. And so to the extent that we can keep the process moving forward, there's people who aren't in the room who are waiting on the outcome.
David?
Yes, my question is related to E&D. If we say hypothetically that we were able to convert to GIC mid-fiscal year, say January 1st next year, and we saved, upwards of $1 million of that, does that by default go into E&D, those savings?
Whatever, any excess revenue beyond what's budgeted goes into E&D at the end of the year as one category of turnback. The other category is anything in the budget, in the aggregate, that is below what we budgeted is also considered turnback for E&D as well. So, you know, both of those two accounts flow to excess and deficiency at the end of the year. You know, the only notable exception could be, and I'm, you know, hypothesizing a bit, maybe we get to the end of next year and we see higher than expected health insurance savings. The school committee could say, look, we're going to let some of that flow back to E&D, but we're also going to take a vote to do a revised budget and appropriate $200,000 over to OPEB, because we knew we took money out. So there's ways that the school committee can make those funds go to different locations, but they're not being expended for other stuff. It's part of reserves.
So, but by default, those monies would recharge E&D?
That is the default, yes.
Unless the school committee does.
Correct.
I understand.
Turnbacks go right to E&D.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I just want to echo two things that I heard from Christy from Acton FinCom. One is I would like to see whether or not we would have any savings if folks did not indicate that they would be using the transportation but then don't. Perhaps it's not a lot of savings, but maybe with some education, some harsh language in that survey that's sent out could make sure that they understand that if they choose and don't use, they're costing the rest of their neighbors money. And in terms of fees, well, this is actually not related to fees. It's more related to having the folks who are using services shoulder more of the costs for that. Just being mindful of folks on fixed income and the significantly higher increase in Boxborough's assessment compared with Acton's. You know, I'm biased because I work as a classroom assistant, but I know that classroom assistants were funded by parent funding in the past, and that was an equity issue. And I know probably a lot of other programs were funded that way too. The school communities that were more capable of raising higher funds had better services and resources. I think it would make sense to go back to that because I've heard from the community members that they are willing to write checks and to solve the equity issues, why not pool those resources? The argument is that, oh, if I'm a Douglas parent, I'm less likely to write a check if I know that it's also going to go to Miriam and Blanchard. But that's just something that we can surmise. I don't think that it actually would. Let's just try it and see if we can fundraise, if people would be willing to donate funds to pay for these programs and for these resources like assistants that really support staff, knowing that they're pooled. I certainly would. You know, I make a donation to the town libraries. I know it's supporting both the public libraries and also the school libraries as well, 9 libraries.
Thanks, Alyssa. Kristen, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Thank you. I don't know most of the people here. I'm Kristen Hilberg. I'm the chair of the Boxborough Select Board. We're also a legacy family. I've got 4 grandchildren now in the active Boxborough school system. So big fans of everything you guys do. First question about all-day kindergarten. I know my own daughter experienced this. She had chosen half-day kindergarten. There were so few children at Blanchard going to half-day. She wound up moving her son into full-day. So I guess my question is, how many towns around us are still charging for all-day kindergarten? Are we taking advantage of kindergarten parents who need all day anyway? Because my understanding is also that most parents are working now. My generation, most of us were stay-at-home moms. It's not a reality anymore. So I guess that's 2 questions. What percentage of children are paying for all-day kindergarten, or families? And is that something that truthfully the region should be absorbing?
So we have, I said to my leadership team, I think we had under 10 students total who still do half day, but we actually think it might be 5.
I thought it was really small,
Total.
and my daughter felt pressured to go to full day because my grandson was going to not get recess, not get specials, and we can afford it. It wasn't that. She wanted him home at noon.
Yeah.
It wasn't a money thing, but she felt pushed.
Yeah, I think it's been, we are probably one of only like 6 or 7 districts left now that still charge for public school in terms of kindergarten. It's been a priority of ours to try and not charge, but the mechanism to get there is very complicated in terms of funding, because where we're up against the cap in funding, we have not been able to eliminate that. We've gone from, what was it, $4,700, $4,750, I think, down to $1,800 this year. We're proposing a modest increase next year just because we don't have the funding in general. I don't think there's a person on our leadership team that believes we should be charging kids to go to public school. I think a lot has changed in our understanding of kindergarten. I think in, kind of a lot of people's minds going back a decade or even 2 decades, it was, you get some public school time, but it's more kind of like childcare for families and things like that. And I think, our evolution in thinking about, early learning, and I can just use literacy as an example. The literacy skills that kids learn in kindergarten are absolutely foundational to what they need to do to grow and remain on target from a literacy standpoint. It's why so much of early literacy programming is focused on kindergarten literacy and screening and assessment and early intervention. It really is a foundational element of all education for kids to be in kindergarten, which is why we've tried everything within our power to reduce costs, to try and get to zero. We make sure that, for families who are in half day at the beginning of the year, we're reaching out on an individual basis through teachers, through administrators, making sure that they know that the cost can't be the barrier for them to attend, and we have fee waiver programs that they can participate in. And so we've whittled it down to probably about 5 kids.
Okay.
And usually by the end of a school year, it's, between 1 and 4 that are still in half day.
Okay. All right, I'm going to take my Nana hat off and put on my select board hat. Reacting to some of the comments that were made about abatements and that kind of a thing, I've had long conversations with our TA, our assessor, human resources. Unfortunately, because property values are so high, abatements really aren't an option. Our assessors explained to us that people aren't being over-assessed. They're paying their fair share. So as much as that's something we can present to people, there's also a limited window when you can actually do it. So what I've been talking to Mike Jones about is finding other ways. So if that extra $100 a month is, that we can't avoid with taxes, can we find other ways? What programs are people not taking advantage of? Fuel assistance, food assistance. A lot of people that I know that have been in financial difficulties, myself included. I had a time when I was in foreclosure. I couldn't pay my bills, and this community rallied around me. This was a long time ago, but it happened. And I didn't know about all the problems that were out there, or all the solutions that were out there. So working with Boxborough resources to make sure people know where they could make up that $100, where we could help them in other areas, because we can't give them an abatement. So it's just something that maybe Acton can be thinking about also, is what other resources are out there. United Way, there's so many places that we can help. So just something to be thinking about.
Thanks, Kristen. Okay, last 15 minutes here. I think we've got probably 2 big things that we need to decide upon. The first is, I'm actually going to do these in reverse. I think the first thing that we need to decide upon is whether or not the current A budget that we have proposed is one that the committee is still supportive of, or hearing feedback from our towns, our communities, do we want to ask the administration to come back and find some amount of cuts? Sensitive to the fact that they've produced 3 or 4 line item budgets already, and that they'll have to do that again, and that we have a meeting in 3 working days, with which we need to vote our preliminary budget. So what I'm going to ask is for the committee to respond to that, and the ask that we'll then have to the administration is to not produce another line item budget yet, but to find some big items that help us get to that point so that we feel comfortable on voting a preliminary budget, which historically is is required to be a not to exceed. If we say, Peter, Sherry, Andrew, find us $750,000 in cuts, and we can vote that number at our next meeting, and then we can produce the rest of the documentation following that. That's kind of the direction that I want to go. I'd like to hear from the committee on those thoughts. And then I would also, once we do that, want to switch to talking about what our thoughts are for structural changes and what our next steps would be on that. Anybody on the committee have thoughts, comments? Lakshmi, then Tori, then Andrew.
So I'm looking at budget A, and the number says 115,312,084 is the budget. So my question is, that is for FY25. Is that going to be the baseline for FY26?
Yes. I mean, can you say more about that?
So is does that become the new baseline for schools operating budget?
Yes.
Okay, so what we're looking at is we completely elevated it, even though most of these are one-time structural costs. We have just baked into the budget permanently.
That is correct, except that when we say that you develop the FY26 budget from the base of the FY25, that doesn't mean that you have to keep everything the same. So for example, if for FY26 we can realize $2 million in healthcare savings, then that $2 million comes off of the healthcare line item, and you're no longer increasing by X percentage. It comes down. So, I mean, it always, 1 year's budget always serves as the base for the next year, but it doesn't mean that everything has to increase proportionally. Like the two big, and we discussed this with Boxborough Finance Committee the other night. Yeah. There's two big things that are going to change in FY26 that we can say with relative certainty. One is health insurance costs. And the other is that the debt from the junior high and senior high, and we did confirm it's actually both of them, but the debt from the junior and senior high school comes off the budget as well. Now, the revenue source in the debt exclusion comes off the budget at the same time, so that's not free money, but you're going to see a substantial $4 million plus decrease in the total district operating budget just from those two items alone.
Okay. So it potentially could become 115, it can stay at 115 or even can potentially go lower, the budget for FY26.
Yeah, we've been working on a multi-year model for the district budget just to be able to project out, because I think that's a reasonable thing that people would ask. Yeah. We're at a point now, and that we have a lot of work to do to hone that and feel confident in the numbers. But we know our contractual costs a year out. So, just as we answered earlier, we've projected our personnel costs next year at a 5.1% increase, which we think is a pretty reasonable rate. We've projected out some of our special education costs at 4%, even though, we think they might come down a little bit from that, just based on the overall trend in inflation and what we're seeing happening at the state level. We have carried other assessment costs at the 4%. Increases, utilities, things like that. And then we increase the other areas of the operating budget 3%. And right now, that actually adds up to a negative budget increase of about, 0.75% for FY26. The problem is that doesn't help us in FY25.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like we have to get through FY25 first to get to that.
Yeah.
But I do think there's strategies that the district can implement in FY26 to not come in with a 3 or 4% budget increase in the out years, and in fact do some things to actually help lower that base and then get us on a better path to project forward.
Okay, so but the towns do build their levy limit if that keeps going up. So at one rainy day they're going to use it all, like they're doing now in Boxborough, right? So it's citizens don't get a break from all that.
Right. I mean, we're working on everything we can do to reasonably project expenses, and I don't want to sit here today promising, negative 0.75% budget increase, but, just taking health insurance out of the factor and the Parker Damon debt, that's the impact of the budget, using all of our best projections for the other categories.
Okay,
Tori.
thank you. Yep.
So to your point, Adam, about not being municipal budget experts, I have come to very much appreciate the education I have received from the members of ALG and from select board and finance committee members who've met offline to just talk about understanding this. And I had the opportunity to represent us at the meeting with the Boxborough FinCom. And there are a couple of things that struck me in the face there that I just want to share with everyone as we have this conversation. So on the Acton side, we had a shared challenge with the Health Insurance Trust that brought us to the table together in October. We've been having that conversation since October. That's why Acton's moving forward with the override. Not quite the same shared moving in lockstep with a single problem that is forcing a conversation in Boxborough. And I'm sure that John and Tony will jump in if I get my summary wrong here, but as I understand it, the budget that we're putting forward starts pushing Boxborough up towards its levy limit, especially when you look at historically what it's been spending on its municipal needs. And so I had two takeaways from that meeting. There are some very strong voices pushing for a 10% Boxborough assessment, which I think put us down around a total budget appropriation for the district of about $112 million. So that would be a tremendous impact, right? Or actually, no, it was 110. It was not much. Thank you. Sherry's looking at me. It was not much above the B budget as it's there. So I think that would be a huge impact on our schools, and I'm not comfortable with that. But I think we all need to recognize that the voices I'm hearing from Boxborough is that they're not sure they can get this passed at the level that it's at. Impact on that, if I understand the process correctly, is it gets kicked back to us. It goes through a couple of more reviews, but eventually it would end up at a district residents town meeting type of situation where we'd be voting. That would be really ugly. That is not going to be good for any of our communities. So whatever we come up with, we need to be pulling in the same direction. The other thing I took away from that is exactly what we've been talking about. We need to be able to paint not just what next year looks like, but what several years look like, because it may be possible that we can get through a lot of pain in this year if we know that in the next couple of years we've got some space. So to that end, Adam, I think we do need to talk about getting task forces against all of these problems, and then I think I guess we talk about if the A budget is at the right level, or I don't know where else we pinch money from. I mean, I listened to this and I don't see any more staff that you can take out without really impacting our schools. So I don't know if there's anything structural that's out there, but.
Andrew?
Just a quick question for Peter, who's left the room.
I'll come back to you. There are other people who want to talk.
Actually, you probably know this as well. Did you include the GSI, the health insurance adjustment prediction within this budget? GIC?
No.
Okay.
No, we budgeted as if it was the 22.8 for now until we settle everything.
Okay, so that was the only question I had, because that's an additional savings that might be a part of this and could help with the way it's being presented out.
And one of the things that we talked about, because I asked that same question several times, because we don't have it settled yet, it would be too premature. And then the other part of this that's yet to be resolved is what is the run out? So if we move to GIC and January 1st, we still have claims that we need to pay out for the balance of the year. There's the loan to HIT, there's all of those things. It's just too amorphous at this point, and I think given the position that we got into this year, it would be rash to try and make some savings there where we're not 100%. Liz.
So I'm just going to preface this with I understand that this is, again, sort of like a big ask, but I really, sort of to piggyback off of Tori's, and after watching that meeting, I really need to insist that we take Boxborough's request to lower their assessment a little bit more seriously here. I think that the 10% that they would prefer is absolutely unreasonable, but I would love to see, anything like, and I know that this is more asking of the administration to come up with additional line items that we could cut. And while I want to preserve as many staff positions as possible, I'm going to put my hands up defensively over here, maybe we do go back to all-day K is completely funded by the parents. It's not something that we want to do, but if we can retain staff and also have a better chance of proposing a budget that's palatable for Boxborough, I mean, I think that that's really kind of where we're at on that. We've been catering sort of to Acton's levy limit for years. I think it's time that we put a little bit of that love and attention on Boxborough too.
I see lots of outside of the committee hands up, but I just want to make sure that the rest of the committee has an opportunity. So I'm gonna pull up. Sorry, Yanshin, go ahead.
I know I brought up the
unpublished C budget a few meetings ago, and again, I'm gonna bring that out again. I do think that we should consider to take some more money, make some more cuts from the current A budget. So just so that, I know the Boxborough FinCom was very recent in everybody's memory because it just happened, but all the conversations I've been having in the town of Acton, a lot of residents are saying we cannot afford it. It's not about we don't want to support the schools, it's about we cannot afford it. So please, I know it's painful, but that's my ask.
All right, so I'm going to throw a number out there for the committee. If we took $1.3 million out of our budget and came down to a budget of $114 million, just to put this out there, that results in a 14% assessment increase to the town of Boxborough, so 1.951 million of an increase, if I'm reading table 6 correctly, 15.895 million. Agreed, it's not the 10% that the town of Boxborough has, but this is, neither of us are providing ultimatums, we're providing a negotiation. And so off the top here, Peter may be prepared to answer, what might it look like to remove 1.3 million from the budget? What are some things that are student-facing? What are some things that might not be student-facing? What are some things that we might be able to not fund as much in our sort of regular budgets that aren't student-facing, but that we might get some pushback on because we're not funding, say, OPEB or capital projects at the same level that we've committed to in the past?
I think it's a little hard. I would want a little bit of time to come back with specifics about that. I think I can share, kind of where we're at right now in our thinking. We're on, at the number we're at, if we continue to go into the elementary schools, we're probably looking at the loss of teaching library media to students, which in conjunction with the reduction in digital literacy coaches means that we will no longer have kind of that digital literacy component of the curriculum, short of what teachers do in classrooms. So that certainly would be one potential impact. The other thing that's probably likely at the elementary level would be the coaching model, in which case, we've also reduced district curriculum staff. So I worry, certainly about the impact of that. I worry, at the junior high, any more reductions are probably the loss of a team at the junior high. And that, I think, we've certainly talked about the potential administrative reductions, but we also worry that as we, tax classroom teachers, if we don't have the administrators there for support of that, then we're, kind of creating a dual level problem. And at the high school, I think it's really looking at, we're into the teaching staff at the high school, and some programs and things that directly impact kids. That's my overall assessment of probably where it would go next. I think there's, some thought though, and it kind of comes to, the committee and school committee's tolerance for other areas. I'm concerned about reducing capital spending. I'm concerned about reducing OPEB contributions. There's a piece of me that also says if we know health insurance is a year out and then health insurance can come back, then maybe we do. I would rather preserve the capital spending and take a pause on some of the OPEB contribution and maybe be able to save an amount there, and then once health insurance gets solved, bring back the OPEB contribution a year later. That feels still fairly responsible to me. Considering, OPEB is, 40 years away from being funded, it might be 41 or 42. That doesn't mean that we should eliminate it and then never bring it back. It just means that we have to defer it for a year and we have to hold the placeholder knowing it has to come back the following year when health insurance comes back down. Those are ways that we could reduce some of the previous impact on the different levels that I've been thinking of a little, but I need some guidance from school committee if that's, kind of an acceptable solution to you. And then I would want to go back to the leadership team and really, hone that over the course of the next 3 days before we come back to you with kind of a proposal for what that would look like.
How much is in this year's budget for OPEB? Or, sorry, next year's?
9 what?
So out of the 1 to 1.3 million, if the committee desired, you could take out 750,000 just from OPEB and not cut another teacher.
965, 987.
All right, so there's $750,000. Thoughts from the committee?
Do it.
I would rather lose money we have to owe to ourselves than do anything that's going to imperil our kids.
Thoughts from the committee in terms of a number that feels responsive to our community, but also not too detrimental to our budget?
I think that the additional reduction of the 1.3 seems reasonable to me. Sort of the definition of compromise is that no one's happy, right? So, you know, I think everybody gives a little bit, and this is really us all meeting in the middle.
And I think we should talk to Oxford.
They're here, they're eager to talk, so I'm going to give them a second to talk as soon as I just look at the committee one more time.
I think if they're aligned, I think.
Lakshmi said that she thinks we should talk to Boxborough and that we're probably aligned with that.
Yeah, I think it's a go.
Thanks. Tori.
I'm comfortable with the OPEB idea. Based on what I've heard today, I'm nervous about taking out all the coaches. I think there are efficiencies there, and I don't know that you can just take them out and bring them back the next year.
Okay. Other thoughts from the committee? Yanshin?
So right now on the table is the 1.3 million or $750,000. I guess my question to the leadership team is that which number will be considered do no harm to the students?
We're past that point, I think is what we've heard today.
117.5?
Less harm.
No, I know. I mean, it's hard to answer that question. I mean, obviously, our interest in a leadership team is to provide the services to kids, right? And so that's the delicate balance that I know you also have, from a community standpoint. So, I mean, like if we reduce OPEB at that level, and again, I do it with a lot of cautionary tale to it, because I don't take that lightly. But if we do that in year one, I would say if you give me a target with some flexibility to go back to the team and try and brainstorm ways that we can try and do that without impacting kind of the direction of what we're doing for kids, we can certainly look at what that is and come back on Thursday and try and present that. I'm just hesitant to commit. There's a lot of thought that has to go in, and the principals are obviously here, they're listening. They've heard, concerns around tax base, they've heard concerns around services to kids. But we need to be able to process this all and come up with some ideas, I think.
All right. John, Tony, Kristen?
Yeah, so from the point of view of the Boxford Finance Committee, I mean, I think, I've got two positions to put, I guess, because there's my position and there's also the committee's position. So there's strong voices on the Finance Committee that they wanted a 10% cut. I think the fact that there's been a debate and some listening, and you've come back with a different number, which may be acceptable. I can't say that's going to work or not. We're meeting on Tuesday evening, and we'll have this discussion. I'm personally, like Tori, very nervous about even the effect of that on terms of school of education. So I'm in the camp of we need to fully fund the schools and not do any defunding. I think this process has been a little bit dysfunctional in a way, it seems, in the sense that there was like a negotiation between the school management and the school committee. And I don't think Boxborough felt part of that process. I understand that there are Boxborough people on the school committee, so that's how it's supposed to work. But I think the way it's all come down, from my point of view, is that it seemed to be we got given a number based on Acton's needs, and it's like a sort of take or leave it number in a way. So I think there may be some future learnings there for next time round in terms of how we manage that process. So I think we'll take this back, and I think there's obviously some progress. There's always some listening there, and I think we'll need to discuss what number, if that number is enough to keep the majority of the committee happy, and, or whether we need, or what the number might be. That's where we stand.
So, is that the C budget?
I think we don't know what the C budget is, John, and clearly you can see, when I asked the superintendent, can you find me 1.3 million, it's not easy, and the things that come out of that can range from delaying our contributions to OPEB through to removing, some significant student-facing functions. So I don't know if we've got one yet. I don't think I've got a consensus from the committee yet.
I think one thing I would suggest to everyone, we keep talking about C budgets, but I want to keep us on, there's going to end up being an A budget and a B budget to this. So it's just a lower A budget, right? We're just lowering the A budget.
I call it A2.
There's no better scenario than what we come up with for the A budget. So that's just the reality of what we're facing.
So what is the immediate risk of not funding OPEB for 1 year? Is it just a delayed on the financial return? Is that what's the shock to the system if it were to go bad?
Sherry, I'll let you chime in on this. My gut reaction is we've just taken a loan out of OPEB to fund the current year FY24 of health insurance. Now, the district's OPEB position is...
A loan? Is that what you said?
Well, it's a loan out of OPEB, right? You can actually request reimbursement for your prior year's retiree expenses through the OPEB trust, which we did in order to fund the health insurance overages for this year. So, our position's going to be down on OPEB already. We don't draw on that on a regular basis, so it's not like it's putting the current district's finances at risk. I suppose, in probably the worst case scenario, it might be like a bond rating agency might say like, hey, what's going on with OPEB? When we talked to the bond rating agency earlier this year about, the idea of withdrawing, they didn't have any concerns about a 1 year withdrawal. They said, if you make this like a long-term pattern,
I have it.
Then we're going to be concerned if every year you're taking your last year's money out of OPEB and not funding it.
So is there literally interest paid on it, or is it? No?
No. We just took the money out of the OPEB. We just don't earn the interest on it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's unearned interest, yeah.
And it leaves you open to greater shocks because it gets recalibrated I think it's every 3 years. They do an actuarial recalibration. So the greater your outstanding debt, the higher you are to a larger shock, right? Which is why it's always better to pay it down earlier, because the minute you get rid of that risk, the less shock you're open to at the next recalibration.
Right. But we've
John, your biggest concern is getting it back. Once you take it out of a budget, it's hard to get it back. But I guess if there's going to be any year, and this will go back to you, Dave, when you asked if there would be money that would go back to E&D, yes, there would be extra money, but it might not, and this might be you too, Lakshmi, we might not be able to have a negative assessment next year because we would still have to put that money back in as if we had it there.
But if you did save through the budget A, the 2 million from the health insurance, that would start filling up E&D, isn't it?
Yeah, short of a legislative, short of a piece of special legislation coming out of the legislature in the next 60 days, we will not realize that savings for FY25. It's really going to end up impacting the budget in FY26 is my best estimate. Now, if, all the stars align for us, maybe, but I wouldn't project it.
Kristen, did you have, sorry, John, go ahead and then Kristen.
You go.
One of the other concerns, and this has been brought up before, is it's basically, Peter, we're proposing a 15.6% increase on the Boxborough side, but we have no visibility on where we're going to be in the next year. In terms of, is this budget going to solve this crisis with any lasting impact, right? And I know that's hard for you to answer, but I think what we're looking for is, really some type of honest best guess model in terms of, yeah, this is where we're going to be in '26, and look, the numbers are not nearly as onerous as they are currently.
This is what I've been thinking actually about a lot of this meeting, about, and especially as we started to talk about structural change in the school budget. Open enrollment didn't drive us into the challenge that we're having this year, right? Adding MTSS didn't drive us into the challenge that we're having this year because we had made trade-offs along the way to be able to do that. Adding special education staff didn't do it because we actually have reduced our out-of-district exposure and costs over time and things like that. What drove us was extraordinary increases in costs over a relatively short amount of time when the base of our budget never kept up with even the start of that cost escalation, and now we're being bitten by some of that. And it's coming back because a lot of the gap in funding was filled with pandemic relief and the other types of funds and everything else. Inflation, I mean, you obviously see the inflation chart end abruptly because there's no new inflation numbers. So the only thing we have for inflation numbers are the, best case projections. And it looks like we're headed toward the Fed's goal of 2% or under in, the relatively near future. And there are better finance people than I am. I'm a educator, not a finance person. But if we can return inflation to a reasonable level and we have eliminated the use of reserves in our budget and we bring our health insurance costs down by a couple of $1 million or between $1 million and $2 million, let's call it, reasonably. And the school committee can really look hard at like the longer term cost saving strategies that we want to implement. I actually think by raising the budget on the first time, we should be able to manage that in the out years. I mean, that's my best understanding of it right now, and I'd ask Sherry to venture a guess on that too.
So let me just interject right there. I mean, that's your real leverage to say for option one. That really is. And that's not communicated anywhere in here. And I know it requires assumptions, but that's what you got to do. If you're telling us this is the solution that's really going to get us out of this mess, you have to show us what those projections are, and they are projections, and the assumptions you make, and say, look, this is where we're going to be. If we don't do this, we're going to be having this meeting next year.
Yeah, and I will admit that I'm very cautious on that because we sat here last year at this time and then even as early as September of this year and said we really didn't think we'd need an override in order to be able to get by. We predicted it would be tight and that's what we thought. And now we're, as we've actually seen the actual expenditures for FY24 come in, obviously that's not the case. And so I'm a little cautionary in some of those projections right now. And it's just out of, me being not trying to, jump to conclusions.
But I think anybody who would belittle you for trying to make an assessment for the inflation rate 2 years out, we wouldn't waste our time with that. We understand what you're trying to do. I think what we're trying to do is we would respect the effort to say, here's the model for the school, and here's how all of these costs and expenses are going to carry out over time. And here, because of this pain point, we're all going to take it. Here's how it trends us in a better direction. And if you get the inflation wrong, you get the inflation wrong. That's a very easy thing to fall back on. I don't think anybody could call you out on that. I'm sorry.
Right. And if I get it right, I should be on the Fed, right?
There you go. You'd be on an island
that's my next stop, everyone. No, in all seriousness, I mean, I think that the budget we're proposing is the budget that's, with the modifications to health insurance and, the realization of normal costs again over the next year is going to put us in a significantly better position. That's why we've continued to stay with the preliminary budget numbers this long. If I thought that we were going to end up in the same position next time, I would do something different with our operating budget, or quite honestly, we probably would have been very aggressive in exploring some of those more drastic measures, like school reorganization or closure and everything else. But so I think, quite honestly, the fact that we didn't go that route as an administrative team is a signal that we think this is a corrective measure. And yes, unfortunately, we just went through this period of extraordinary inflation, which, raised the base that we're going to have to deal with for, the future. We don't see that as a continuing trend, and even if you look at, the past history of inflation, when it starts to come down and come down to the levels that it appears to be going, it stays there for a little while too. And so I quite honestly, I feel good about what we've presented, but I understand there's a community discussion around it too.
Kristen.
Okay, so I think the first thing I want to say is every single person here is here because they were hired, appointed, or elected to do their job, and that's what everyone is doing. So standing here as a select board, I think I have to just kind of point out Boxborough's position. Because we have enough levy limit, we don't need an override this year, even at the 15.5.9%, which means town meeting floor makes a decision. Acton has two opportunities. You make the decision on town meeting floor, you go to the ballot. So you've got that two-step process that we're not going to be able to offer to our citizens. I actually asked if we could do an override without needing an override, and you can't. So we have that piece of it where we're trying to represent everybody, as an elected board. Now, say it all sails through, because we're not anti-school. Please know that. This is a problem to be solved, and we are two communities that work together and always have. So it's not an Acton versus Boxborough thing, but it's how do we fairly, make sure that everyone is represented. Now, say it all sails through. A budget, fabulous, yay, let's all go. Next year, Boxborough will be forced, or will most likely be forced to an override, at which point the only place we'll be able to make cuts is to our town services, police, fire, DPW. And we have been very, very conservative in how we've grown those departments. We don't have a lot to cut. So by not acknowledging the situation this will put Boxborough into next year, it's unfair to our residents and our taxpayers and our voters. So that's why we were asking for some kind of a compromise of somewhere between A and C. And I heard you just saying, Peter, you're just changing the numbers of the A and the B. That's fine. We were calling it a compromise because we're trying to look at our big picture. Because again, this is more structural than anything. Taxes did go up in town this year. There was a lot of screaming. Taxes are going to go up next year, which also indicates to us that if we head to an override for 2026, our likelihood isn't high. And we're impacting services significantly. We don't have a lot of new growth. We don't have a lot, we don't have a lot of development in town. Again, already looking at all the different possibilities, but it's scary for us looking at our forecast. So that's where we're coming from when we're saying, where are the efficiencies? Where are the cuts? And we don't want to impact our children's education. Nobody wants that. But we also need to have police and fire and DPW.
And I'll just add, the one thing that makes this even more challenging is if the school committee puts forward a 0% increased budget, Boxborough still sees an increase to their budget because of the cost shift based on enrollment. So, even if we had the, a negative budget increase, there's still probably an increase to Boxborough. And I think that that's something that everybody has to sort of begin to socialize now, that even with our best intentions on the school committee side, because of the way the demographics are changing in both towns and who's living in which town, Boxborough will see an increase there.
One other structural proposal I think we can consider, and the sooner the better, is changing the Acton leadership group to the Acton Boxborough leadership group, and in getting the Boxborough Select Board and the Boxborough Finance Committee as involved in this process as early as everyone else can be, so that we can share information, we can have these conversations in the fall, so we don't feel like we're up against it in the spring.
I think we'll table any further discussion of that to have the leaders from the towns consider that, but there's definitely some opportunity for better coordination there. Yeah.
So two things. One is I think the postponing the OPEB contribution this year makes a lot of sense, maybe with the understanding that it would be replenished next year. We can't bind the future committees or town meetings or anything, but I think that makes a lot of sense in this year, where I think this particular year is hard. I also wanted to say I'm really sympathetic to the 15% increase in Boxborough, but I am not sympathetic that this somehow puts it on Acton, and I'll say three things. One is the school committee decided to set the proposed budget at $2 million below their level services budget. Acton decided to accommodate that in an override. There's no effect on Boxborough whatsoever. Acton's leadership group decided to accommodate that in an override. Acton's select board will vote on that probably at its next meeting. We'll see what the Acton select board does, but that has no effect on Boxborough. Secondly, in previous years, Boxborough has benefited from Acton hitting its levy limit, right? So we couldn't increase the budget anymore unless Acton had an override, and therefore Boxborough's share of the school budget was limited by Acton's levy limit. Just the same way as if you hit your levy limit next year, our share of the budget will be limited. And third, the 3-year rolling average of increases benefits the growing town, benefits the town whose enrollment is growing. So essentially, when you have an extra student from Boxborough, Acton pays for the education of that student for the first year and a half. So this is not, I believe we're all in this together, and I've said so many times, and I've also talked with people about that people in Acton need to be sensitive to the fact that Boxborough is facing a 15% increase, but I've heard now from 3 or 4, maybe even 5 speakers that somehow it's on Acton, that we're in a tough situation. It's not, and in fact, Acton has benefited Boxborough in all years, but this one is not Acton's fault.
Real quick, Jason?
Yes, I'd like to changing topic slightly back to the topic of using OPEB to fill the gap. That's not actually a cut. That is, superintendent used the word loan. It's kicking the can down the road. It's not actually a cut. If you want to make a cut, which I do recommend you do, if you want to make a cut that has year-over-year benefits, don't do one-time things such as OPEB. If you want to get down to the $114 million number, which I do recommend you do, make sure it's an actual cut, because that's how you actually protect against all future years, because you're bending the cost curve right from the start.
Ginny?
I just wanted to reiterate something that I think keeps getting lost, which is we are not even asking for a level service budget. And none of these budgets are level service. They all involve cuts. The A budget involves cuts. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that.
Thank you. All right, back to something a little more tangible. I need a number from the committee. I need to know if you're happy with the 115 million, if you want that number to come down, and by how much, because we need to give the administration some guidance there.
I don't know, do I need to make like a motion or something? I mean, I sort of made, because the thing is everyone's kind of looking around at me. I've already said, I think that we do need to bring it down at least a little bit more.
I was waiting for you to say that number again, because I'm going to trip over it.
Which number, the 1.3 million? And if that is something that, seems unreasonable, so, I mean, you seem to have some calculations like at the ready. I'm just wondering if we drop that down to, maybe the OPEB trust plus one other thing that we could cut, could we get it down to, could we reduce it by $1 million? Like, there's a lot of sort of wiggle room if we need a number, but I do think that we need to try to bring it down a smidge.
Andrew?
Can I suggest that because we have to look at the OPEB number and we have a desire to try to drop this a bit more, that rather than say, I want 113 or I want 130, say to Peter and Sherry, can you come back to us on Thursday with a number that is inclusive of the OPEB pause for a year, and let's say another option for
I've got one for you.
Yeah.
So I asked for capital. Peter was reluctant. There is currently $927,000 in the capital fund balance, the CIP reserve fund, stabilization fund, if I'm reading this correctly. No, I've got how much do we have left in the?
Are you talking about the general fund piece of it?
The capital stabilization.
Continue talking, I'll find out in a second.
So I'm curious. I'm also sensitive because I know that there are people with fiscal concerns around that, and we've used stabilization, we've used reserves in the past, and it's gotten us into trouble. But the sense that I'm getting from the committee is we need to be responsive to Boxborough, but any next step that we make towards personnel cuts are directly affecting students. And that seems to be an untenable area for us. And so the question is, what's the number that we would like to ask for? And do you want to quantify or qualify that, saying, find us $750 to $1 million in cuts that may be distasteful from a fiscal prudence standpoint, but don't cut any more teachers? Hi, Sherry.
Hi. The munis balance as of 12/31 was $646,000.
600,000. So you could take another 125,000 out of that. I'm throwing stuff out here. I'm looking to the professionals.
So 150 was used for this year.
Right.
I'm going to give you an unpopular answer right now.
Go for it.
I never want to be sitting here in this position again. And personally, I don't want to do anything with our reserves next year beyond zero. That's my own personal assessment. It's obviously the committee's discretion. I worry that we have HVAC units on top of the high school, that when we need to cool it in the summer because we have programming there, we run garden hoses and sprinkler systems over the HVAC coils. Like, those could go at any time. We had a complete Parker Damon, the system failure this year, where we couldn't even access the building controls to adjust temperatures. That cost a significant amount of money in the current year, where everything is so tight and we have these aging capital and infrastructure things. I personally would rather preserve the money in the capital stabilization fund. It's not fun and it's not exciting, and it's quite honestly, like, everything I want to do educationally does not talk about capital stabilization, but I don't ever want to be in a position where something breaks and we don't have the money to fix it, and now all of a sudden we're impacting education. And for as awful as this year is, it would be worse if we find a way through it and then end up in the same position again. And I think we need to keep as the guiding light, don't ever come back to this place. That's my professional assessment.
Fair. Other thoughts from the committee? Anybody else got something they want to throw out, ask questions about? You're not on my committee, so I have to ask my committee first. I'm sorry.
The only other thing that I would suggest, and I don't know how big of a impact this could make, and I know that there are some people on this committee that would be very vehemently against this, but if all-day kindergarten is a lower hanging fruit, I know the number that was in the proposed A budget was somewhere around like $2,300 a year for that all-day kindergarten tuition. I'm remembering off the top of my head, but even if we increase that a little bit to try and make up that difference, to get to a more significant number to reduce the assessment.
So I think we should start with a number that Boxborough is more amenable to. I think that would be better, and then negotiate with them from there up to see how far they can go.
I don't think we have time, first of all, and second of all, the number that they've put out there is untenable, I think, from our viewpoint. So we're coming back to the negotiating table with them, with another number, and that's what we need to come up with today. That's what we're talking about.
I think, like you said, you started with 1.3. Let's see where it goes. I think I'm okay with it, but ultimately they're the ones who are going to decide.
And so then are you okay with some of the cuts that were then mentioned, eliminating a junior high school team, eliminating library media specialists, eliminating more curriculum support in the schools, eliminating teachers in the high school? Because that's what we're hearing are the next things that have to go to get us to that 1.3.
I am not comfortable with any cuts, but I'm not the only one who's paying for it. If I am the only one paying for it, I'd say I'll pay it. But we're asking others to pitch in. Right, the whole community. So in that case, we have to look at them in their eye and say, you have to pay for this and this because of this, right? So if we have a reasonable answer, let's go for it. But if we don't have a reasonable answer, I think we have to do that.
Tori, did you have something to add?
So if we just did the OPEB piece, check my math, You already have Met
I guess my initial question is, did you only want to do 750 of the OPEB piece or the whole OPEB for the year?
What does that look like for the whole thing for the year?
It's 965, 987.
So what does that do to Boxborough's assessment? I ran 750, not the 969.
965, 987 puts Boxborough at a 4.41% budget increase. 15.954 million would be their assessment. Did I read that wrong?
The percentage confused me, how we got from 15 to
Sorry,
4.
14.41.
Okay,
Table
I was
six-
getting excited there, but.
For those who have seen Table 6, there's a lot of different colors and boxes that you have to go through. So it would be a 14.41% assessment increase.
I'm definitely comfortable that far. I don't feel good about the further cuts to staff.
So 1.3 million cut gives us only 1.3% down?
No, that's not quite a million.
900,
Oh, just the 9. Oh, okay.
yeah. So that's not funding OPEB at all, 965, 987. Close
Okay,
to a
I
million.
think that's not really a cut, right? That's where we're just deferring payment to OPEB by a year.
It is, so let's be very clear, this is what we've done many years in the past where we have not cut our budget and we've used reserves to lower the assessment. And that's exactly what we're talking about now. It is a compromise. It's a compromise that might have gotten us into this trouble in some ways. As Jason would say, it's not a cut, it's deferring something, and then it's something that we will have to put into the budget next year, so it's not lowering the base. But the sense that I'm getting from the committee is we don't want to cut any more staff members, and the only way to get there is to cut other costs.
And you know, I'd love to see option 1 on the bus thing if we thought we could turn it, but I hear that we're not comfortable doing that. That's the only other thing that I see as I look at this as an option.
Yeah, it should.
So I know Boxborough FinCom is meeting on Tuesday, right? Can we just pause the OPEB contribution at its entirety and then negotiate with them? If they reject that, we'll come back to the table.
We don't have time, so what we need to do is be prepared. We have to post an agenda with supporting materials by Monday, Tuesday? Tuesday, that lists what our budget vote is going to be.
I'm not comfortable with cutting any of the CIP capital improvement.
Yeah, I think that idea of mine was not a good one, and
Right.
I've taken it off the table. I'll own that one.
I think the only thing I'm like comfortable with, quote unquote, is to stop the OPEB contribution, but nothing else.
Anybody else on the committee? Leela?
I'm hearing Boxborough and watched the entirety of their FinCom meeting. I understand that we have fiscal responsibility, went through the whole budget binder. I think what I'm stuck with is that any other cuts to our district, I don't know how they don't impact our students. And while we have a responsibility to taxpayers, I think we also have a responsibility to students that are being educated by our district. And I think with more stressed out teachers, they can't show up in the ways that we're expecting them to. And so as someone who lived through an acute period of mental health crises in the district, as a student, I would not want to subject any other students to that. And so I'm really not comfortable beyond this OPEB piece continuing to cut things.
Thanks. I'll make one comment. I know that the Acton FinCom is screaming to provide some input here. And I'm going to say something in support of where you're at, and it's somewhat responsive to you too, John. Making this cut is a compromise, but it's not a good compromise at all because it does not solve a structural problem. It comes right onto the budget next year. It would be something that we would then need the superintendent and the administration to forecast out what the out years look like, because we'd have to put that $900,000 back into the budget. So what I'm hearing the committee say is we want to be responsive, but after what we've heard over the past 3 budget presentations from the administration, it's untenable for us to continue to cut the people who service the kids in the district.
No, and I commend you for that, because I think we need to learn to start making the right tactical decisions with regard to the financial plan of the school system. Not to say that we haven't been, but this is one of the ones where we're just tempted to do it because we're trying to make a number work. I understand that. And we'll certainly be taking that back to the committee.
Thanks. Jason.
As distasteful as it is to cut personnel, there is a great risk of trying to hold on to this number of personnel, this number of staff, that may end up causing a larger loss down the road when an override fails or when reserves are completely gone. It is better to cut a few more now. I realize you're cutting 25 people now, but if you look at the actual number of teachers cut, you're cutting, for example, in one of the categories, you're cutting 5 people, 2 of them are custodians. It's better to cut a couple more people now and bend the cost curve now, rather than hold on so long that you take out all possible safeguards, and then you trip over something. You have a much larger, much more painful, much more unavoidable failure later. I agree with the superintendent, don't take any more out of reserves. I believe that OPEB is a form of reserves. I would not cut that either. You're just gonna have to fix it later. If you are taking a year of cuts, take a year of cuts and bend the cost curve.
Christy, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just a quick one. We all know it, but it's worth remembering. We have to come up with a number that people will vote for. This has to not just pass everyone in this room, but we have to convince everyone who isn't paying nearly as much attention that this is a number that they should figure out how to fit into their budgets. And some of those people don't have a direct interaction with the school. Everyone in this town is proud of these schools, but not everyone can afford this much of a jump in this short of a period of time.
Thank you. All right, back to the committee. Any final thoughts? Yanshin.
I appreciate both FinCom's opinions. I just want to say that on this committee, some of us are parents. We have children that goes to school every single day. We know, we're talking about their teachers' jobs. And as much as we try to be impartial, to be responsive to the community members, we also have children who have to go back to the buildings, knowing that what their parents had advocated for. So I think, at least from my perspective, as a parent and as an elected official, I have tried my best to advocate for the students. And I'm comfortable at this point to let the voter decide what they can and cannot accept. Thank you.
Liz.
Mine is just a very quick clarification, because I do take Jason's point, but if we were to compare apples to apples, you know, the 900,000 that we're looking at for the OPEB, is that only 1 or 2 cuts, or are we talking about getting rid of another 10 teachers? Because that's very different.
Alyssa?
Does anybody know what that 15.59% tax impact is for the average single-family home in Boxborough?
Yes, we do know that, actually. It's, I bring the numbers up before I quote it to you, but I do know the number. I'll give you in a minute.
I have a question for you, Peter. If we said, I'm going to round up the OPEB contribution $1 million, are you able to come to us on Thursday with alternatives to that type of reduction? So what I'm hearing is $1 million, $965,987, is something that the committee feels is something that they're willing to come to the table to Boxborough in terms of a cut. I'm also hearing from many people in the room that making that cut from OPEB is not the best choice to make. I want the committee to know what the other option would be to find $1 million in the budget.
I would actually recommend then you just tell me, come back with what $1 million looks like. And let me give it a little thought, because, excuse me.
Getting all choked up about this,
yeah, I'm all
aren't you?
choked up. No, in all seriousness, I want to give some real thought to whether I could recommend to you that level of OPEB reduction or not, and in what combination. The reason I'm concerned about that level is, you know, we've gotten to this point in the budget before where we get stuck. And we make the reductions, and then, you know, with all the right intentions in the in the past years, we've ended up using excess and deficiency to plug that hole. And to all of a sudden take $1 million of OPEB is the same solution as using that $1 million of excess and deficiency. And it would shift kind of how we model out FY26 and what we're able to bring in savings. And as much as I want to make sure that we preserve FY25, I want to make sure we don't make FY26 a subsequent problem. And so I quite honestly, I just need to give it a little bit of thought in a few days to be able to come back with a proposal for what I think we need to do. It's not going to be easy. I know the leadership team's listening as well, but we need to be able to get together, get around a table, sort this out, and come back. If you tell me you look for $1 million, show us what $1 million looks like. I can show you what those options around $1 million and give you a recommendation for it.
That's where I'm at. I think what we've gotten to, I was pushing the committee to come to a number, and through a surreptitious way, we found a line item, which was OPEB, that was about $1 million, and everybody was kind of okay with that. But we also know that getting to that million through that method is not the best method. So I guess what I'm hearing the committee say is we want to see another $1 million in cuts in the budget, or at least what that looks like, so that when we meet next Thursday, we can take a vote again on that top line budget number, knowing that all of the details that need to come in to feed that will not have been done. But is that enough direction and sort of enough, it's not enough time, but enough direction for what you need to do for the next meeting?
We can do that for the next meeting. One thing procedurally, we do not need to post the preliminary budget number in advance. You can actually deliberate on that during a meeting and then decide the number you're voting right during the meeting. What we need to post in advance is the agenda that says you're going to be taking a vote on the preliminary budget.
Oh, we're going to be taking a vote.
So that does give, Boxborough members an opportunity to talk to Boxborough Finance Committee again, bring back, a lot of the deliberations from today to the other members who couldn't be here, and have that continued conversation, and then come back feeling like you've done a little bit more outreach with the community. So I feel confident in that process.
Excellent. So I'm looking for consensus from the committee, $1 million in cuts or proposals for $1 million in cuts at our next. Ginny's not happy about it. I can see that. Lakshmi?
I think we started with the 1.3, and I'm really concerned we went back to $1 million now.
I think going to $1 million provides us with the opportunity to be responsive to Boxborough's issues while still being responsible for our children inside the schools. We can't cut students. I think it's difficult to think about cutting teachers, but at least with regard to this, we can play around with how numbers can work. Yes, we are cutting teachers, but with the potential of going with OPEB, we're not going to cut teachers. I don't want to imperil anything that's happening with the students. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with B, finding $1 million with multiple options, which could also include GIC savings as we go through the line, might allow us to be able to do this without additional pain. Okay. But I don't think we can go to 1.3, and I'm curious to see where it comes out.
All right.
Can I make a suggestion here? See, for us, if Budget A doesn't pass, we are in a really bad situation. I don't think Budget B is really a good option for us, right? So how about we come up with the numbers in between that the administration can afford and work with Boxborough to see if we can work from there up and try our luck.
I think I'm kind of suggesting the same. So yeah. I want to keep us to our overarching schedule, which means that we need to vote a number on Thursday. I'm going to ask the Boxborough representatives to take back $1 million in cuts to the Finance Committee on Tuesday. We're going to vote a number on Thursday. As always, that's a number that we won't exceed, and we'll get feedback following that group's understanding also of what it means to make the next $1 million in cuts. And we can still cut before we need to get to our final number. It'll require a lot of coordination between the committee, the leadership, and the leadership in Boxborough. So I think, we haven't, not all is lost in terms of our being responsive to Boxborough and meeting those needs. I think the first go here is $1 million in cuts. We'll see on Thursday what those $1 million in cuts mean. And we will most likely vote a budget that is about $114,312,084. And as long, I mean, we can't go any higher than that. But if we get strong feedback and a good conversation between us and the Boxborough side that there needs to be some more, then we can still vote a lower budget in the end. But we're running out of time, and we're also really running out of time. So you've got your marching orders for Thursday. Good luck. There's one last thing, and I'm going to try and make this as quickly as possible. Peter did recommend, as going through his structural changes, the school committee forms a task force to study some of those longer-term structural items, such as start times, open enrollment, school closures, maybe some of the other transportation-related items. I'm seeing lots of nodding heads from the committee, nodding heads that we should do that, start a task force. Ginny's like, yeah, sure, I've got another year.
Do you want me to move it? I can move it, then we do it.
So I'm seeing a consensus from the committee to begin a task force. What I'm going to ask for is 3 committee members to join that task force. Please send me an email directly if you're interested in serving on that task force, and then Peter and I will begin to establish that task force.
I think we should ask committee volunteers to just stand.
Any committee member who wants to join the task force, please stand. Thank you. Okay, so, but I do want to be very clear here, and I know it's not late, but it's been a long day. The committee is committed to finding additional savings through structural changes, and we are forming a task force to look at that. It is not a fast process, but we're starting fast now so that we can make those changes. I have 2 more bits of business. The first is a request for confirmation from the committee, and I'm requesting the whole committee to maybe just come back to the table for another 2 minutes. At our last meeting, we were looking for a consensus from the committee in support of the override in Acton, and there was some confusion about whether or not we provided our consensus on the overall budget increase for Acton or just the override. The override number is $6.6 million, and I'm looking for confirmation from the committee as a whole that you support the override of $6.6 million. I don't have a vote posted. So I'm looking to just reconfirm through a consensus of the committee that we support that $6.6 million override in Acton. That's outside of this. We did that consensus vote at our last meeting, but there was some confusion by the community as a whole if we were supporting the overall number of roughly $8+ million or the 6.6. So we want to be very specific. Does the school committee support an override of 6.6 million? Not a vote, just consensus. Do you support the override? Okay, you look confused. I just want to make sure. Okay, I'm seeing, Tori, so you can report back to the ALG that through a consensus of the school committee that we definitely support the override, which, by the way,
I support the override, but not the number.
wonderful. So Lakshmi says she supports the override, but she doesn't support our current A budget number, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then lost my train of thought. Okay, well then,
Finance committees adjourned too, or select boards if they have to.
I will. I just got one reminder for those of us who sat in and hung with us for this long. Peter and I will be back at it on the roadshow Monday evening with a community coffee online. You can go to the school committee's, the school website homepage to get the link for that. Happy to continue these conversations Monday night. And do any of the boards and committees need to make motions or adjourn or anything? Christy?
Yes, I need to make an motion. We have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, thank you. The aye passes.
I don't think you guys have a quorum, so I'll look for a motion from the school committee to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. That is unanimous.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.